Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Environmental Planning Commission's special meeting of March 13th, 2024. I will call the meeting to order at 7:02 p.m. For those joining us in person, please note, it's 7:05. For those joining us in person, please note that due to our hybrid environment, audio and video presentations can no longer be shared from the lectern. Requests to show an audio or video presentation during a meeting should be directed to epc@mountainview, all one word, .gov by 4:30 p.m. on the meeting date. Additionally, due to our hybrid environment, we will no longer have speakers line up to speak on an item. Anyone wishing to address the EPC in person must complete a yellow speaker card. Please indicate the name you would like to be called by when it's your turn to speak and the item number on which you wish to speak. Please complete one yellow speaker card for each item on which you wish to speak and turn them in to the EPC clerk, right over there, as soon as possible, but no later than the call for public comment on the item you were speaking on. Instructions for addressing the commission virtually may be found on the posted agenda. Regarding interpretation, this evening we will have interpretation services in Spanish and Chinese for item 5.1 via Zoom. The Zoom translator function, identified as a globe, is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please click the globe and select the language you prefer, English or Spanish or Chinese. If you do nothing, you will hear English deliberation, but you will not be able to hear English translation of Spanish or Chinese speaker public comment. Please welcome Eileen Lee, Ana Jimenez, Jason Walker, and Ivory Zhu, who will be providing the translation services tonight. Jason Walker and Eileen Lee will turn it over to you to provide Spanish language and Chinese language instructions on how to set up the interpretation function. Additionally, recently, regional and local elected and appointed bodies have been subject.
Yeah.
Sure. Are we good? Okay. Thank you, Eric. One last note before we get to roll call. So recently, regional and local elected and appointed bodies have been subjected to disruptive, racist verbal attacks by anonymous callers during virtual public comments. The City of Mountain View is fully committed to racial, religious, and cultural equity and justice as we strive to create a welcoming, safe, and inclusive community for all. This advisory body, this commission, welcomes respectful and non-threatening public comments regarding matters over which the commission has jurisdiction. Comments deemed otherwise pursuant to the Council Code of Conduct and the Government Code may be grounds for immediately terminating a speaker's comment period. With that completed, now I will ask the EPC clerk, Clerk Hong, to proceed with the roll call.
Commissioner Clark?
Here.
Commissioner Cranston?
Here.
Commissioner Donahue?
Here.
Commissioner Nunez?
Here.
Commissioner In?
Here.
Vice Chair Gutierrez?
Here.
And Chair Dempsey?
Here.
All commissioners are present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the EPC on any matter not in the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the Commission from acting on non-agenda items. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on non-agenda items, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on non-agenda items, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. Madam Clerk, do we have any cards or hands up?
We do not have any speaker in person or on Zoom on this.
All right. Having completed that, we may now move on to the main item at hand. Item 5, the study session. 5.1 specifically, the R3 zoning district update goals, phasing, subdistricts, and location criteria. We do have, again, Spanish and Chinese interpretation for this item. We'll first have staff presentation, followed by public comment. At the closure of public comment, the Commission will then discuss the item, including any questions. Staff presentation from our beloved Advanced Planning Manager, Eric Anderson.
Thank you very much. I will wait just a moment for the presentation to come up. No worries. I need to share here? Is that the problem? Oh,
Sorry, technical issues. Just a moment. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Apologies for that. That was my fault. Thank you, Chair Dempsey and Commissioners. My name is Eric Anderson. I'm joined by Amber Blazinski, the Assistant Community Development Director, and this is a study session regarding the R3 zoning district update. The R3 zoning district is the primary zoning district for apartments, condominiums, and row homes in the city. It covers approximately 15% of the city's area and includes about half the city's dwelling units. It also covers nearly every rent-stabilized apartment in the city. The area of the district is currently made up of about half apartments, 37% row homes and condominiums, and about 9% single-family homes and duplexes. The remainder are made up of churches, parks, childcare, some commercial uses, and a few vacant properties. The project started back in 2020. Since then, it has gone through several rounds of outreach and study sessions, with the last study session in 2021. In addition, The project has been put on hold several times to address other city priorities, such as the displacement response strategy and the housing element. A few notes on the displacement response strategy. It is a related project led by the Housing Department. It's related because rent-stabilized units are a key focus of the strategy, and the R3 zoning district contains the majority of rent-stabilized units. Council in October directed staff to prepare a replacement ordinance that would go into effect when SB 330 sunsets. Another council study session is scheduled next week regarding other elements in the displacement response strategy. The city's housing element and various state laws must be considered in this project. Housing element programs include prototype analyses, updating definitions, lowering development costs through the reduction of standards, addressing state laws, allowing for live-work units, and incorporating some R2 areas. Relevant state laws include the state density bonus, which is frequently updated, SB 478, which sets limits on the city's floor area ratio, FAR standards for smaller projects, SB 684, which creates a ministerial pathway for smaller projects starting in July, and of course SB 330, which includes a replacement requirement for rent-stabilized units and a prohibition on downzoning through the year 2030. A few more notes about state density bonus. Most projects that use it will be eligible for waivers and concessions of development standards that the city has little control over. Therefore, the R3 project cannot realistically anticipate everything that can be built, even if densities are not increased. Since the project has not had EPC or council input since 2021, and staff has conducted extensive outreach since then, staff is seeking direction on the draft project goals, which are based on public input during outreach, as well as council direction from previous study sessions. The first draft goal concerns opportunities for more diverse unit types. The second articulates key features of the community's design vision. The third reflects the community's support for neighborhood-serving uses. And the fourth reflects the city's statutory requirements. The last goal is about growth, and it has the most significant consequences on how the project is carried out and the remaining questions for this study session. Some considerations for increasing allowed densities. There wasn't clear consensus in the community regarding the amount of growth this project should include. There are opportunities for discretion on a project-by-project basis if the council is interested in increasing densities, but staff would need to conduct more analysis and bring back those options. Increasing densities may also create more opportunities to support other R3 goals, such as increasing the diversity of unit types and supporting more commercial customers. The first question for discussion tonight is, what feedback does the EPC have on the goals for the R3 project, and does the EPC support Goal 5? The second question tonight is about project phasing. One option would be to take a phased approach to the project, addressing the mandated items, such as the housing element programs, first. The city would then start work on the discretionary items, like density increases and the required environmental review. This option would complete the required items quickly, allowing the city to focus on non-required changes at a thoughtful pace. It would ensure compliance with housing element timelines, and the city could conduct density work in tandem with any necessary analysis for replacement requirements. Another option is a combined approach, where the density increases and required elements are done in the same process. This may reduce some duplicated efforts, but it is unlikely we would be able to meet the deadline for the housing element requirements. The second question for discussion is, if the City Council wishes to increase general plan densities in the R3 zoning district, should the city phase the project by addressing the housing element and state law requirements and other related tasks first, or should the city continue with the full scope of the project? The third question is to receive feedback on the R3 subdistricts and densities. To provide context, here are the existing general plan designations that are in the range of the current R3 zone. Each of the proposed subdistricts is associated with an approximate density range. These are tentative and subject to change. These density ranges are also equivalent to an existing general plan designation. This helps provide a framework for decision makers to understand what could result if no density increases are proposed, or if there are necessary updates in the general plan. These, on the screen now, are potential images of the R3A zone, including neighborhood multiplexes and neighborhood townhouses. Buildings in this subdistrict would be 2 to 2.5 stories and about 15 to 25 units per acre. This zone could be appropriate for upzoning some R2 areas. It may be a down zone relative to current R3 standards and densities, so it should only be used in existing R3 areas if other areas are upzoned. These are potential images of the R3B zone, which would be roughly equivalent to the medium density residential general plan designation, which covers about 70% of the existing R3 zone. It includes building types such as neighborhood townhouse, neighborhood courtyard, as well as smaller core multiplexes. Buildings in this subdistrict would be 3 to 3.5 stories and about 25 to 35 units per acre. These are potential images in the R3C zone, which would be roughly equivalent to the existing medium-high density residential general plan designation, which covers about 28% of the existing R3 zone. It would include building types such as core townhouse, core multiplex, and core courtyard. Buildings in this subdistrict would be 3 to 3.5 stories and about 35 to 50 units per acre. And these are potential images in the R3D1 zone, which would allow block scale buildings up to 4 stories and about 50 to 75 units per acre. It's roughly equivalent to the existing high-low density general plan designation. It would include building types such as core courtyard and mid-rise. These are potential images in the R3D2 zone, which would allow block scale buildings up to 6 stories and about 75 to 110 units per acre. It is roughly equivalent to the existing high density general plan designation, and it would include building types such as core courtyard and mid-rise. It's important to remember that the city is prohibited from reducing overall development density under SB 330. This means that if the EPC and council are not interested in increasing allowed densities, the project should focus on subdistricts B and C and subdistrict A only in R2 areas. There may be an option to incorporate R4 into the project if the city council is interested in the R3D2 subdistrict. Existing height overlays and the existing R3D zone will also need special considerations depending on the other subdistricts selected. The third question for discussion is what densities and which character subdistricts should be included in developing alternatives that staff will bring back for EPC and council consideration at a later date. The last question is regarding location criteria for new densities or commercial uses. In order to bring back sub-district map alternatives for decision maker review, staff is seeking input on the criteria for locating densities and commercial uses. These criteria are based on public comment, council direction, and best practices. The EPC may wish to identify other criteria or provide feedback on how the criteria should be considered. And these are potential criteria for where to locate commercial uses. The final question is what feedback does the EPC have on the criteria for where to locate higher densities and commercial uses? Next steps for this project are shown here and are largely contingent on council direction on April 9th. This is a summary of questions before the commission, and this concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions you might have. Also available are the project consultants with Opticos, Stefan Pellegrini and Tony Perez. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. And I think with that, we go to public comment. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on this item, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press star 9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with star 6. Clerk Hong?
We have 3 speakers in person and 1 speaker on Zoom. I'll call the in-person speakers first. So the first speaker is Robert Cox, and followed by Tony Rath.
Okay. How many minutes do I have?
We'll be doing 3 minutes per speaker for public comment.
Okay. All right. Ready to go? Chair Dempsey, Vice Chair Gutierrez, and members of the EPC. I'm Robert Cox, representing Livable Mountain View. We've already sent a letter on this topic, so let me say something about our key point without repeating everything we've already said to you in the letter. We support making our neighborhoods more walkable, enhancing their tree canopy, providing sensitive transitions to existing homes. But we do not believe this is the right time to do a wholesale increase in density in the R3 zoned areas, or an inclusion of the R3, D1, or D2 zones, which are effectively R4 zones. Here are 2 reasons we do not favor upzoning R3 now. First, rezoning existing R3 naturally affordable and rent-controlled apartments will displace the existing tenants. The public outreach to those tenants show they do not favor displacement from their homes, even if with the right to return years later. Secondly, COVID has made major changes in the way that our tech employees work. Many tech employees now work from home, others work in an office only a few days a week. We have had tech layoffs and corresponding population decreases in the Bay Area each of the last 3 years. 10% of our newest apartments lie vacant, which is twice the normal level. The scant new housing in the pipeline promises to be more of the same small, dense luxury units, which are not desirable for people working many days a week from home, especially if they need space to raise a family. We have yet to reach a steady state in this post-COVID world. Mountain View is on schedule, if we take the normal cadence of 20 years, to writing a new general plan in 4 years. At that point, we will have a better idea of what the post-COVID tech world is and how to plan the next 20 years for our city. Changes in zoning beyond what is required in the housing element can be explored with broad public outreach. The city can write up new precise plans and vet them with targeted public outreach. This would yield a much better outcome for the public than a one-size-fits-all R3 rezoning solution now. Many of my closest friends have left Mountain View because state mandates and some of the people in our city leadership are demanding that new housing be built without park space, parking, and other amenities that make our city a desirable place for current and future residents. We need to change course, or residents of our city will continue to vote with their feet and leave Mountain View. Our city deserves a better future than that. Thank you for listening to our concerns.
Next is Tony Rath, and followed by Albert Jeans.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this item. I'm Tony Rath. I live in the R3 zone in Cuesta Park, and I would like to ask you to recommend going with the 2-stage approach that was mentioned in the staff report. So basically, first take care of the state-mandated changes, and then consider doing R3 upzoning if desired. I am not in favor of a blanket upzoning in the R3 zone, and if we are to consider density increases in that zone, we need to make sure that we get it right. And so I would like to ask that it is tailored to the neighborhoods. For example, the neighborhood that I live in looks much closer in character to an R1 or an R2 zone. So it has a lot of single-family homes in it, fairly small lots, and there are a few apartment buildings, but for the most part, most people would agree that it looks like an R1 and R2 zone. So it does not match what the staff report shows as row houses on the low end of the density spectrum. So clearly our neighborhood is lower in density than that. And so I think it's important for the acceptance by the community that the existing character of these neighborhoods is being respected and preserved to the extent that it can. It is also important that we preserve the ability to course correct if we make mistakes. So Mountain View is already looking to increase the number of dwelling units by 50% or more in the coming years. And so it is important that we learn from this exercise and see where the problems are, because we're not really looking at schools, we're not looking at water, we're not looking at electricity, just to mention a few. So I think it's important that we learn from this and make sure that we have the ability to change course if we make a mistake. And so a blanket upzoning of this district, I think, could potentially lead to big mistakes that we cannot undo, especially because the state is tying our hands in terms of turning things back. Finally, I'd like to say that the development standards that we have are important in helping ensure the preservation of the tree canopy that we have, the green spaces, the shaded streets, the inviting walkable neighborhoods that we all want. And so it is important that we preserve some semblance of these development standards so that we can continue to enjoy this great community that it is. Thank you.
Next is Albert Jeans, followed by Salim Dameji.
Give us just a moment while we work at a small technical issue.
Right. Thank you very much. Okay, my name is Albert Jeans. Yeah, I actually agree with both the previous speakers, even though I didn't talk to them before this meeting. And so, next slide, please. Yeah, as you said, this was presented to us both in 2020 and 2022. And I remember the 2020 presentation, people were really aghast at the densities that were being proposed. They ended up having things like 4-story buildings next to 1-story residential, as shown on the left here for Montalopa and Farley. And so it seemed like staff got the message, and 2022 presentation was much more reasonable, shown on the right there, where you had, sensitive transitions to all that stuff, and all that sounded really good. So I'm kind of surprised that staff came back this time and said, we're going back to the 2020 presentation. I mean, maybe they needed the bigger variety in buildings to conform to the different types of buildings that we see in the R3 right now. But I think it's definitely going to have to look more like the right-hand side if you're going to have community acceptance. Next slide, please. As the previous speakers mentioned, we can't just have unlimited growth in Mountain View without thinking about the consequences. One of those is parkland. This is a little map that I put together which shows city-owned parkland and the ratio of parkland to the number of people, which is supposed to be 3 acres per 1,000. And shown in the green is the actual numbers. And this is based on city-owned parks, not including the schools, because as you know, those have all been fenced off now, at least for most of the day. And in my neighborhood, which is Sterling, particularly we only have 0.43 acres per 1,000. And yet, in the next few years, that is entitled projects that have either been built or are in construction right now, we're adding 3,000 people in that area. And there's only, I think, maybe a 1 acre park being built on the Eaves property. So we're even falling farther behind in that. So if you upzone R3 and start letting people just build willy-nilly, I mean, it's just going to be a disaster. Next slide, please. And this is just for my area, Stirling Estates. I mean, Stirling area. As you can see, in 2020, the population is 10,000. There's going to be an increase of about 3,000 people because 1,400 units are going to be added. You know, we should be getting a 9 acre park, and yet nothing like that is even on the horizon. Next slide, please. And so, as with the previous speakers, I believe that any long-term growth should be well-planned and should be part of the general plan. I mean, you got to think about how you're going to do this. You know, schools, parks, utilities, shopping, retail. You just can't keep adding people and expecting the quality of life to stay the same. And zoning should only be used to realize those goals and not should initiate growth on its own. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next is Salim Damaji, followed by Hala Ashawani.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. As you know, the housing element is a contract. It's legally binding. That is HCD's interpretation, and they're the ones who get to enforce the rules. So one of the things that's omitted in much of the staff report is analysis of how the housing element program around R3 affects both the two-phased approach and the optionality of Goal 5 in the remainder of the staff report. If you read the housing element program, it's drafted quite well, program 1.3.A. The city has to conduct a development prototype study, update definitions as necessary, revise multifamily development standards in major districts, including R3, and precise plans to ensure projects can at minimum meet their allowed density, and here's the important part, are economically feasible where possible through reductions of physical development standards. Economic feasibility and cumulative effects of standards will be inputs in the reduction of standards. Okay, so a number of things. One, you cannot possibly satisfy the legally required elements of the housing element without also reducing the physical constraints on what's allowed to be built. Opticos completed a design prototype study in 2020 and identified 5 constraints to development in R3. And so the city is on record as having identified different constraints that currently prevent projects from being economically feasible. Development has gotten worse in the last 4 years, so we will have to do more than what's outlined in the Opticos study. For context, the reason why this program is in the housing element is that staff did not want to add comments about R3 in the constraints portion of the housing element. You'll recall this. And so the reason why this program is here is because it's one way of creating a foothold to make sure that the city actually does what it's legally required to do. Staff wanted optionality on how they went about making development feasible in R3. Again, this is another dishonest and bad faith attempt to renege on housing element obligations. The last time I was here, the Planning Commission voted 3-2 against in favor of regulations against homeless shelters in most of El Camino, despite having trepidations about the legality of doing that. And you asked staff to talk to HCD about whether that's legal or not. So HCD is aware of this now, and additionally, they'll be made aware of this R3 reneging if this is how the city proceeds. But you should just keep in mind the general practice that Planning Commission does not want to get into. You do not want to get into a general practice of having staff propose something that is clearly legally dicey and for the Planning Commission to fall back on asking HCD for what they should do. If you do this as a general practice, then there will be like a dozen different programs the city has to act on without first getting HCD's commitment.
Time is up.
Yeah, thank you.
Next person is Hala Ashawani.
Yes, good evening. Excuse me. Good evening, APC Chair and members. Thanks for giving the opportunity to give input on this. My name is Hala Al-Shawani. I'm a longtime resident of Mountain View. I wanted to concur with the staff report that we have met the housing requirement, and actually I think our city has done a fantastic job in doing that, accommodating the necessary changes that we needed to do so we can meet the state requirement. However, R3 rezoning would require a significant, with really big impacts on almost 50% of the city, as the staff report stated. I support my earlier colleagues and Mr. Albert Jeans in his statement that we should take our time, not hurry, and make sure that all the other things that the city are working for, such as doing developments that would have walkability and pedestrian friendly, white sidewalks, parks, open space, all the infrastructures that we might need, or we will need, not we might, but we will need with the increase of the number of residents. The impact on the climate and climate extremes, the current climate extremes, you really have to think about that, because increasing density very quickly without any regulations or any thought put forward will have extreme and negative impacts on the residents, on the environment, and so forth. I support developments that go through general and precise plans. Those seem to work really well because they address each community and their needs, whatever they are. As you know, it's different throughout the city, and I think that would be a much better way to do the upzoning. And I think we have the time, since the cycle of 2024 to 3032 has been met. And I have to commend the city on the ability of having done that. Thank you.
We still have Zoom speakers. The first speaker will be Bruce England. Bruce, you can talk now.
Thank you very much. Bruce England, speaking for myself, although a number of these points come from also Mountain View Coalition for Sustainable Planning and Green Spaces Mountain View and other groups that I talk with. I have 8 points, but I'll go through them as quickly as I can. 1, please include requirements for robust pass-through opportunities where those walking and biking through project locations can readily move through them. Please encourage design. 2nd, please encourage designs that address needs for seniors, those with disabilities, those with small children. One key need is including any means we can to help those age in place that chose to do so and are able to. 3rd, multi-floor buildings under development should incorporate active design elements. That means emphasizing stairways over elevators to help encourage active activities among people who are in Mountain View. Number 4, primary goal for any residential project is that housing be affordable with little or no displacement of current residents resulting. Where displacement can't be avoided, we'd like to see in place robust relocation measures provided to those affected. Also, for new residents, a broad range of transit and other transportation options be made available. This could include providing transit passes in coordination with local transit and transportation agencies. Number 5, during construction phases, make sure, please, that sidewalks and walkways are not blocked more than they need to be. This is sometimes really a problem. In Mountain View, signage can be lacking and people don't know what's going on. They have to go around. Not great. 6, please accommodate work from home environments. Very important to consider. This is a way of working that will not be going away in some form. 7, please plan on incorporating applicable elements from the biodiversity strategy and urban forest plan when those are adopted by the city, which is expected in the near future. The best designs will serve both human and non-human needs. Similarly, adequate park space is needed, as was pointed out by a previous speaker. And lastly, number 8, please plan on incorporating elements from the new dark sky ordinances once those are adopted, which is anticipated to happen in the next year or so. Thank you.
Next person is Addie Keating, followed by Louise Katz. Addie, you can talk now.
Hi, thank
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Addie, can you try one more time?
Hello, good to go?
Yes.
Okay. So I would like to speak to the benefits of increased densities. Increased density is what supports people who live here and shop here, is what supports local retail. And when local retail maintains active and vital in all the different little nooks and crannies of retail areas, then that increases walkability and bikeability. It makes someone more likely to take a shorter walk rather than a longer walk to go get the one or two items they need at the grocery store or to go to a coffee shop. So I think increasing density in appropriate places is a way to vitalize and, you know, continue vitalizing Mountain View. And with more work from home and more people doing food deliveries and from restaurants and from grocery stores, I think it's important to maintain those retail areas with more density. And the SB 330 has done a great job to slow down, basically stop redevelopment and of apartments. And so I don't think that there needs to be too much concern, especially with council's commitment to a replacement when SB 330 someday sunsets. And I do care about transitions, and I also very much support height, because when land is redeveloped, that sets it in place for a long time. And when there's height, that allows the green space, the attractive landscape buffers at the edges, you know, keeping that greenery and beauty while allowing the density that makes this a vital place. It's the people of Mountain View that are using all its facilities and stores. And I think density will improve the city. So I hope that you will support increasing density and height. And I hope you will also, I'm optimistic about stacked flats. My understanding is that they will be a way to let each level have more light entering the units. I would love to have bought a single family home. I couldn't afford that. I'm very happy with the condo that I did buy in Mountain View. And many families are going to be considering what can they afford. So increased density will give them options. Thank you.
Next person is Louise Katz, followed by David Watson. Louise, you can talk now.
Thank you very much, and to the EPC for having this meeting. I wanted to address 2 points, the issue of the lobbying that seems to come forth whenever we have these discussions about density, that there should be no setbacks, and that somehow setbacks are going to prevent us from having housing or enough housing. And I think in particular what the last speaker noted is that, you know, we need green spaces, we want them, but there are parties who are arguing that there should be no setbacks. That should be one of the goals. And of course, I think most will agree, especially considering what's in this staff report and basically every other report that I've seen, which is people do want walkable streets with shade trees. They want green spaces amidst the density that will come. And having no setbacks also means having no space for trees. Somehow that no parking is good and space for trees is bad. That is a very strange equation, and I hope there's none of our governing party offices embrace that. The other concern that I have is the issue of displacement, that we seem to be creating a vocabulary of very fine and reassuring words that people will get to come back after 3 years. but I don't see any data that tells us how entire buildings of residents who will be thrown out will actually be able to navigate market rate housing for years while they wait for something to be available for them to come back. We know there's no real transit on the horizon, and we know that if people have to live far away from jobs that they currently have, it's very unlikely those jobs are going to wait for their return if they don't have private transit to come back and forth. So I would like this commission and others to ask, how can we actually have what the council wants, which is to understand how to develop an ordinance regarding displacement, if we don't have the data as to what will actually be the fate of all of these people? I find it curious that Sacramento and the organizations that brought us our housing policies have included volumes of numbers for RENA, tiny setbacks, fees, parking ratios, et cetera, but they don't seem terribly interested in giving us data as to how displacement will actually affect the lives of our fellow residents. And I think that is information we should have to guide our council and you. Thank you.
Okay, next person is David Watson, followed by Alex Brown. David, you can talk now.
I'd like to follow up. I think you noticed Salim's comments early on the city's legal obligations. Those are, I think, very insightful. You should really take another look at those comments. I also want to share a personal perspective, though, on why this is so critical. As a lifelong resident of Mountain View, I've seen friends forced to leave, not because our parks are lacking, but because they couldn't afford our skyrocketing rents. Our city's restrictive zoning laws, tight setbacks, height limits, density restrictions, they're throttling our ability to meet the urgent need for affordable housing. It's not just a policy issue, it's about the lives and futures of our community members. California law compels us to facilitate affordable housing development, but beyond the legal imperative, it's a moral one. Our actions now will determine whether Mountain View remains a vibrant, inclusive community or becomes an enclave accessible only to the highest earners. I urge us to prioritize practical, immediate solutions that increase housing availability. Our friends, families, future generations deserve a Mountain View they can afford to call home. Thank you.
The last is Alex Brown. Alex, you can talk now.
Hey, friends. Like many of the folks commenting tonight, I've been involved in the meeting since the project kicked off. As Eric is definitely aware, hi Eric. The comments from the public in those meetings was not quite as monolithic as was implied by some of the earlier speakers. There were many participants who called for increased density and height limits, and especially mixed-use developments with ground floor retail. I am glad we went back to the alphabet plan. I like the slides and descriptions much better than the pseudo form-based options in the second round of outreach. I'll reiterate a call from years back for R3D, 1 or 2, wherever we can. We shouldn't aim for the bare minimum. We should try to do what we can to fix historic injustices and inequities. We should not use previous generations' failures to build housing as justification to block building new housing. The crisis we are in cannot be solved by continuing the patterns and practices that got us into it. If we want parks, we should better utilize land by building up to free up space, not encourage greater sprawl. I also agree with Bruce's call for stairs, but that's mostly because I like stairs. Maybe we can do some single stairwell plans in R3. I feel like David might appreciate that. I was also sad that Albert had slides, but no city skyline simulations. I miss Albert simulations. And anyway, have fun, commissioners. Looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
We actually have one more speaker, Leah Gurin. Leah, you can talk now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Ilya Gurin. Hello, members of the Environmental Planning Commission. I believe the main goal of this update should be to enable new housing. The staff report, as well as many of the commenters we just heard from, have expressed a desire for a housing stock that's better than what exists today according to various criteria. The only way this will happen in the R3 zone is if new housing is feasible and actually gets built. We've spent years discussing and rehashing our goals for the R3 zone. It's time to wrap up this process and put forth standards that will increase housing availability and improve our built environment. Over.
Thank you. That's all of our speakers.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay, having completed that, we may now turn to questions from the commissioners. With the forbearance of my colleagues here, because there's a lot to cover and a lot of complexity in this, I want to see if we can kind of break it up into little pieces and be orderly as we go through this. So, and I will try to use straw polling, because I think straw polling is a good way to kind of make sure we don't spend too much time on things that we already agree on. Question number one, feedback on the 5 draft goals. If we can maybe does anybody have questions on goal number 1, create opportunities for diverse unit types, including middle income ownership and stack flats? You have questions on that first one? Anyone?
Is it possible to get the goals like up on a screen, somewhere highly visible for the public's sake as well?
Great question. I think, Mr. Anderson, I believe you have that. That's a good idea. Does that answer your question, Mr. Nunez? All right. All right, well, let's get some questions answered. Commissioners, for number 1, creating opportunities for diverse unit types, any questions of staff or anybody else? We're good? I got to look at the screen. Commissioner Gutierrez, thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Chair Dempsey. I have a general question not related to this first, though. Albert, is it possible to have his PDF also be sent to us as well? Because I know right now he just presented ad hoc, but I'm just trying to figure out, could we get a copy of that?
Do you still have the copy that you, okay. It would have to be emailed to the EPC.
Great.
Yeah, so if he emails it to EPC, I'll send it to you.
Thank you, Albert.
Commissioner Yin.
Just a quick question. Did the benchmark cities that staff had provided examples of, I know a lot of them were like 4 to 7 stories. Were any of those ownership or like an approximate proportion?
That data came from our consultants, Opticos. Mr. Pellegrini, do you have any data on roughly the proportion of tenure for any of those benchmark studies?
Chair, I do not have that information. It wasn't requested, but we can follow up with that information if it's pertinent.
Okay, thanks. Actually, I have one more if you guys are willing to entertain me. In the slides that you showed for the various typologies, or sub-districts, I guess you're calling them, there were, I don't know if you can put them up, but in the first couple, I was curious if those are considered stack flats. If you can pull it up easily.
It's difficult to know specifically from the slides. It's often hard to tell if it's stacked, if it's ownership or if it's apartments. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's even hard to tell from an individual image if it's a kind of a shared entrance or an individual unit entrance. Like the image on the left there, those could be shared entrances or they could be individual unit entrances. It's a little difficult to tell. The lower right image, could also be individual entrances, or it could be shared entrances. Part of the, I think the benefit of a kind of form-based approach is that those types of distinctions can blend in better with, so you can have a stacked unit that looks like a row unit, or and they can blend in better with a broader range of different kind of building type environments as well. I would say almost certainly the one in the lower left there is stacked. And that could be, there's no reason why those couldn't be condominiums. It's hard to know.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to just clarify, when we use the term stacked flats, whether or not they can be done at various levels of density.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Nunez.
Thanks, Chair Dempsey. In the housing element in that program 1.3, there is a reference to the conduct a prototype study. So I'm wondering what constitutes a prototype study. Is any of that underway actively? What's the time frame, if so, in terms of that being delivered? As much as can be expounded on that might be helpful.
Sure. So we've already done a lot of work on that, and one of the public speakers actually alluded to, information that we've already provided decision makers around kind of the outcome from prototype analyses. Basically, it's a very simplistic designing of projects, right? So you just do these very block kind of unit locations on different lot sizes. And we've already done permutations of this, of dozens of different lot sizes and configurations. I think what we can do to implement the housing element program is to bring that analysis back to the forefront based on this discussion, right? So we're reorienting ourselves to this project, crafting new goals, getting new direction on the priority for increasing densities. And that would, by necessity, force us to do some updates on this analysis that we already have done quite a bit of. And so that's the work that we have in front of us.
So then in terms of, I'm hearing a lot of work has been done in what would be considered a prototype study, and some of that has already gone to decision makers. Sorry if it's a redundant or silly question here, exposing my uninformedness, but what has that progress thus far informed? Like, what has it targeted? Has it been incorporated into our housing element that was approved? Has it been part of the displacement? Like, where has that work product thus far been showing up?
So again, one of the public speakers talked about the housing element program, which specifically says, reduce development standards in the R3 to make projects more feasible. So it says to, where possible, by reducing development standards, support economic feasibility. And so we have that analysis, which has identified several development standards which have the biggest impact on development feasibility, and things like open area requirements, which are very high in R3. Much higher than you need in order to have, a walkable tree canopy frontage, for example. We have setback standards that increase with the height of the building, and those standards get very, very difficult to implement and very expensive to implement, especially on smaller parcels. So there are a range of standards that we've already identified that we can continue to move forward on, but these, kind of first questions first. We want to kind of reorient ourselves on this project based on all the community outreach that we've done and other things that have changed in the community, new information, and then we'll go back into that work.
Okay, so my last question here, just to confirmation of what I'm hearing, and correct me anywhere that I'm wrong. It sounds like we have conducted, if not a prototype study that is complete, significant portions of one that have informed the housing element, that have informed this staff report here, and therefore it might be fair to say that that prototype study has yielded, in particular within the housing element, constraints that have already been identified as part of the housing element, and which also are for the purpose of us being able to identify the means and ways for us to, in the future, by the end of this housing element cycle, have the 9,000 units that we're supposed to be having per our commitment to HCD. Is that fair?
So the housing element sites inventory and our RENA we've already met the requirements of the state to identify a sites inventory adequate for our RENA. We have a few sites that we still have to rezone to be in full compliance with that. But the R3 zoning district was never intended to be necessary to meet our RENA. And that was clear from very early in the housing element process with the council.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you, sir. So, haven't you shared that parts of the prototype study 1.3.A have been shared with other decision makers? That's great information to have. One of the questions I have is, do you think that it would have been beneficial for you to bring that up to us as a resource so that we could also have that in addition to all the other information that we did have to then be able to conceptualize what could be done, right? And then how we can frame the argument of pros and cons so that we can then have an understanding, a greater, fuller understanding of specifics, right? So that we can contribute at a higher level.
So the information that was provided to decision makers was attached to previous council reports. I think probably the October 2020 council report. And there was a lot of analysis that was presented as part of that council report and study session report, which was linked in this staff report. We have a lot of analysis that we have presented in this report, and there's a lot of different dimensions on which we're trying to get answers to these questions. If you feel you need more, then that is good feedback to staff and to the city council, and that can inform future work on this project.
Thank you, Eric. And then my follow-up question is, in terms of the community input, when it was pointed out to us, both by speakers here present and then those who had chimed in through email, especially from the wagon wheel, I think there was a perspective that the 2020 feedback session from the community versus the 2022, and that one was picked over the other. Could you explain a little bit more in detail why that happened, what the rationale was for that?
Sure. So the 2020 approach, which we had 2 workshops about and and a study session about back in 2021, had a broad range of different densities and building types that was associated with these different sub-districts. There was a map that was prepared and presented to council based on the previous public input, And council reviewed that map and said, well, go touch base with the community some more and get more input and maybe reassess some of the criteria for where you're locating some of these subzones. So then we went back to the community, and just as a matter of kind of sparking conversation to see if we could hone in on different ideas in the community, we presented a different framework for locating densities and how those densities their forms could be organized. And it was a narrower range of densities. So the A in the 2020 approach was less dense than the A in the 2022 approach, and the D in the 2020 approach was more dense than the C. It only went up to C in the 2022 approach. So the narrower range of densities was less meaningful to the community. There were questions about what that range meant and how it might end up creating differences between neighborhoods. So as a result, we discarded that framework, but we're not necessarily going back to the 2020 map. We're keeping the 2020 framework of subdistricts, but we're starting again from square one about how should this framework of densities be organized in the city? What are the criteria we should use for locating densities in different locations? So even though we're using the framework, we're not necessarily using the 2020 map.
Thank you, Eric.
Commissioner Donahue.
I have a question about something that an answer you gave to Commissioner Nunez earlier. You said that the R3 updates were never intended or never necessary to meet the RENA numbers. Is that maybe I'm missing a subtlety here? But it's in the housing element that will update R3 by the end of 2025, right?
Right. So the program in the housing element was intended to do a couple of things. One, ensure general plan and zoning consistency, right? Just to ensure that the zoning district that a property is in, they can actually build to the density in the general plan, right? And that is just fundamentally necessary under state law, under and just a good planning practice, right? It also has the additional benefit of reducing constraints on residential development. There was a lot of discussion with stakeholders during that process of crafting this language, and the discussion focused on, well, are you going to reduce standards in a way that improves economic feasibility or not? And so we added that language into the housing element that says, okay, economic feasibility will be an input. It'll be a factor in how we decide to reduce development standards so that projects can build to their allowed density in the general plan. It's not related to the RENA. So the general plan, the housing element isn't just to achieve RENA. The housing element is also about meeting state law, providing other opportunities for housing, lowering constraints on housing in general. So it's not necessarily just about RENA.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any further questions on goal number 1? Seeing none. Questions on goal number 2, produce better design that reflects the community's vision through objective form-based standards, including but not limited to pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods, respectful transitions, increased canopy, etc. Questions related to that particular goal? Seeing none. Goal 3, questions specific to creating opportunities for neighborhood serving uses. Do we have any commission questions particular to that goal? Okay, I gotta take you off the list here. All right. We're starting to move fast here. I like it. All right, let's go to question number 4, or goal number 4. Updating R3 zoning district to be consistent with state law and the general plan while addressing housing element programs and improving development review. Do we have questions from the commission? Commissioner Cranston.
Yep, a couple. So a question for you specifically regarding the third map in the packet.
Mm-hmm.
There's a table at the bottom that lists the existing general plan capacity, both at current density bonus, no density bonus, and with density bonus. The no density bonus assumes doing the portion of getting, that's not constrained by zoning, right? That's if we went to the general plan levels.
Exactly, yeah.
And if I add that up, it's just under 5,000 additional units of essentially developable capacity within R3 with no change to the general plan.
That's correct. There was a public comment in the correspondence that I think is relevant here, which is that the table there has different ratios in rows. The lower that ratio is, the less likely that capacity is actually to happen, right? Because nobody's going to tear down a 25-unit apartment complex to build 26 units, right? So a lot of that number is on the lower end of that table, but as you get to the higher end of that table, the lower rows in that table, then yes, that is legitimate capacity that could theoretically happen under the existing general plan.
And then the second column, I understand that density bonus can be a wide range of things, anywhere from small amounts to 100%, and you put in a 50% number. My math comes up that says there's a developable capacity of 12,000 additional units if the density bonus is then applied.
Yes, again, same comment applies.
The upper end
yeah.
would become attractive.
Yeah.
That's not included in the existing housing element and not being counted on as part of our arena numbers today. So this is essentially capacity beyond the housing element.
That's right.
Okay. That's question number 1. I'm, to some extent, this is a question 3 question, but it's relevant to me in this one. In table 4 on page 17, you have listed the kind of R's versus the different general plan areas, and I was, I guess, a little confused by some of the levels in here being well above the actual general plan numbers. Okay, and so I was wondering if you could, when we're doing this goal number 4 here, if the zoning says in your ballpark here says from 25 to 35, but the medium high density goes up to 25, why would the zoning go from 25 to 35 if the general plan says 25? Why does why would we use the R3C which goes up from 50 to 35 to 50 when it's lines more with the high-low, which has 50? So in trying to understand what that goal means, I couldn't quite rationalize it to the examples earlier. I was expecting that the range would be maybe bracket the number, but not be kind of the general plan number and above. Mm-hmm. So can you elaborate on what that means?
Sure. There are a couple of reasons. One is coming back to one of the other goals, which is to ensure that projects in their zoning, through the zoning, can meet their general plan density, right? So if we overestimate the capacity of zoning, then zoning is not the constraining factor, right? The general plan is the constraining factor. And that actually gives developers more freedom and flexibility within the zoning to build what they want to build. Let's say they want to build larger units. Let's say they want to provide more parking. Let's say they want to provide more, let's say they want to provide commercial. So these are all space-intensive things that if we set the expectation in the community that the zoning envelope is this, right, then the general meeting the general plan density will ensure that they can comply with all of those, with flexibility, with opportunities to respond to neighborhood concerns or provide more tree canopy in the front yard or whatever, whatever it is that we're looking for. Another reason, and this is a secondary reason, because we can't really predict state density bonus and what it means for actual design and character and standards that are proposed, but it does give a little bit more space in the zoning standards to provide some density, to provide for some density bonus. And the last reason is simply because if we peg the general plan designation too high relative to the zoning, there is an argument that can be made that a developer does not need to meet zoning standards at all. That we have to allow the general plan designation, the general plan density, and this several new state laws have made it more difficult for cities to enforce zoning standards that are difficult or impossible to meet compared to the general plan designation. So we can continue to iterate on where exactly that general plan designation density lies relative to the building types that we are interested in, or the character that we're interested in. But it just should be noted that these are considerations that we're trying to plan ahead for when the development comes in, that we have some flexibility to design projects appropriately when fundamentally what we can enforce is the general plan density.
So a short version would be the general plan density is the minimum that we can permit?
The general plan density is, this is an imperfect way to put it, but the general plan density kind of has to be guaranteed to a developer.
So the minimum.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Any further questions on goal number 4? Commissioner Gutierrez.
Okay, so that's throwing me off for a loop. I'm trying to understand that. So then, at minimum, when you compare that, what Commissioner Cranston had just brought up in terms of the comparison in the general plan, that requirement then, how does that play out with a housing element? If we're trying to have competing interests at the same time to try and meet standards, are you saying then that when a project's submitted, the developer has to meet the general plan requirement?
The developer has to comply with the general plan density. Yes.
Okay.
Plus any density bonus that they may be entitled to. Right.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? All right. So let's finish up our question asking with goal number 5. Create opportunities for increased densities in targeted areas if directed to do so by council. Questions from the commissioners on that particular goal? Not seeing questions. Okay. All right. So what that means? What? Oh, there's one. Commissioner Nunez, please.
So, with regards to the housing element and 1.3. I think you noted earlier in one of your commissioner responses around some of the other goals that we committed to or projects as well. A couple that kind of came to my mind were the parks. I think it's like 1.8, if I'm not mistaken, the parkland ordinance update and the housing element. So I'll just kind of start with a broad question. In terms of our ability to maybe within any kind of rewriting of our of R3 standards, to what extent would we be able to implement incentives, I don't know, like bonus FAR, POPA requirements, whatever that might look like, to the extent that we can take that and increase our available park space?
Yeah, that's definitely something that we are planning to study, if especially if council's interested in increasing densities. It's a lot easier to do that if you're increasing densities, because you can create an incentive structure for those bonuses. And one of those incentives can be the provision of new public open space.
Do we have any examples within the current zoning code or within our current development standards where we've been able to successfully increase our delivery of new parkland to the city's residents through such incentives?
Yeah, well, we do it a lot through gatekeepers. And you can think of gatekeepers as a kind of a discretionary density increase. And it gives the city a lot of opportunity to ask for things like open space.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Another project in the housing element that came up in mind was that 2.6, I believe, affirmatively furthering fair housing. I understand that this is more than just a project. One of the kind of core components or core tenets of how HCD interprets or approves housing elements is that, can you expound on that?
Yeah, as part of the housing element, we had to show that our programs, policies, and sites inventory were equitably distributed in the city. So we had to show that we were providing housing growth in our highest opportunity areas, that we weren't putting all of our low-income units in the areas of least opportunity, and so we had to prepare a ton of analysis to support that argument.
Okay, and then in the objectives and metrics, there's one bullet point in there. Well, I guess two highly relevant ones. First, to remove impediments to fair housing and provide equitable access to housing and opportunity, and that second, improve access to affordable housing in the city's high opportunity neighborhoods through the implementation of programs 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, et cetera, but with 1.3 specifically cited in there. So yeah, it sounds like it says we will achieve this affirmatively furthering fair housing requirement through the implementation of program 1.3, leaving out the others for now, and leaving out the sites inventory right now. Just it sounds like this is a core commitment we've made, one of the core commitments we've made in terms of a project deliverable to support that AFFH requirement.
So 1.3 has a lot in it, and I don't.
Well, through the course of our cycle, right? It's a lot, and we have 8 years to get there, right?
Well, most of 1.3 we have to do very early in the cycle. And I think actually all of 1.3 we have to do at least in the first half of the cycle. But there are several sub projects in 1.3, and I would have to look again at those to see kind of what is most relevant to this AFFH question. I can look into that during the meeting, and get back to you. But there's a lot in 1.3, and I wouldn't necessarily want to presume that the one particular sentence or another in 1.3 is intended to, is specifically intended to address AFFH.
Well, I would agree with that because it doesn't state here that it's any one sentence. It's programs in 1.3. So I take that as that project. In what way, just to kind of further this thinking here, well, I guess from staff's end, in what ways does either minimizing density growth in the R3 zone impact our ability to affirmatively further fair housing in the city of Mountain View and in line with our commitment to AFFH within the scope of Project 2.6?
That's a very complex question. You know, as I think about it, I wonder if our housing director might be able to help a little bit with that question. And I can maybe think about it while he comes up here. But it's a very, very deep, complex question.
Good evening, Commissioners. Wayne Chen, Housing Director. Eric is correct. This is a relatively complicated question because fair housing is quite nuanced, and there are pros and cons to think about with any particular policy. So on the one hand, AFFH framework could be increase more supply and add more housing opportunities. On the flip side, if it causes displacement, then there's that aspect to think about. We are also addressing AFFH through other measures as well, for example, through modifying our BMR program to explore other opportunities for housing in other parts of the city. And then we are incorporating AFFH pieces really kind of implicitly as part of our displacement response. So I do think it's important to take a look at each of the policies and look at the pros and cons for each side and take a careful approach. It's something that we could potentially bring back with some more information if we have a little bit more time to think through it through that lens.
And within the lens of the AFFH as well, my understanding is also that part of what HCD looks at is equitable distribution of opportunity for housing. So to put it, gently, you can't necessarily cluster a certain type of population demographic in one area of the city, or kind of segregation in a way, if we want to kind of use a more direct term. Can you confirm whether or not is that?
Yes, that overall framework is correct. For example, in the housing element, there was a section, I believe it's essentially a new section in the housing element that has this AFFH component. And part of that required doing data analysis and doing a series of maps. And part of the maps is to look at high opportunity areas. Those maps are particularly important typically for larger cities where different parts of the cities may be much more segregated or disenfranchised or have very uneven levels of development or investment. Mountain View, just geographically a smaller city, tends not to have that situation or the same level. I believe our AFFH maps show that generally Mountain View does not have these low opportunity areas. It's sort of high opportunity areas and pretty good opportunity areas. I forget what that middle term is. But as an example, just by way of illustration, in the BMR updates that we will be bringing back to council, we have looked at connecting that housing element program to other parts of the housing element program to create other opportunities and high opportunity areas, such as south of El Camino. So it is being incorporated in other parts of the program. I think with regards to R3, it's a useful lens to think about. R3 is in the areas that it's located in, but we are also addressing AFFH to see if there are other opportunity and high opportunity areas where there may not be as much affordable housing opportunities, where we can identify opportunities to bring units in those locations as well.
So then in terms of affirmatively furthering fair housing versus maintaining current levels of not low opportunity zones. And given that R3 is, along with R1 being, correct me if I'm wrong here, one of our two most, with regards to the city, broadly geographically spread out zoning designations, is it fair to say that by increasing opportunity to housing within one of our two broadly geographically spread out zones, this could be looked at as part of our efforts to deliver on this goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of this will be, for example, taking a look at the FFH maps and just making sure. I believe probably parts of the R3 zoning designation may straddle areas that are higher opportunity, and there are other parts of R3, because it is a relatively larger geographic area, proportionally speaking, with the zoning district. There could be other areas where it straddles more of the moderate opportunity areas. So I think it can be difficult to generalize, and I think part of the staff's thinking through this is how to address those different parts. It can be a little bit nuanced, just simply because the FFH maps may be showing different things in different parts of the exact same zoning district. So I think if the commission wanted us to take a look, maybe bring back some additional information, we can share some of that.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is, if we did nothing, would we be closer to having delivered on that goal?
If the city did not increase density, would have
if we did not
delivered.
provide, regardless of density, if we did not provide more opportunities for housing opportunities, would we be closer or further from delivering on 2.6?
I think probably some kind of balanced approach that has the ability to add some increased capacity, which is what the R3 project is proposing, and then combining it with other efforts in the housing element may be the way to address your question. It may not be able to be fully achieved through this item, but it could be partially achieved, and to the extent that there may be some trade-offs or other impacts, those could be addressed, for example, through program 3.2, which is the displacement response, as well as program, I think it was 1.9 regarding BMR updates.
Thank you.
And just to follow up from a question that you had earlier, program 1.3 includes the item that we will take some R2 zones and upzone them into R3. It specifically says that we would use an AFFH approach in selecting those R2 zones. And so that is, that I believe is the element of when 2.6 references 1.3, that's what it's referencing.
Commissioner Yin.
Thank you. Since Mr. Chen was, or Director Chen was there, I thought of something else. I forgot where I read this, but it was regarding the potential for community trusts. And I didn't know if you had information on that regarding how close we are to realizing that, how many opportunities are actually going to move in that direction, and what the timing of that might be.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a great preview for what we will be sharing with Council next Tuesday. The study session on the next phase of displacement response. It will be available once the agenda packet is published on Friday, and it will, I believe, discuss what you're looking for, which includes information about a recommended approach for acquisition preservation, the community ownership action plan, and in there it will talk about potential recommendations or recommendations for helping to enable organizations like community land trusts to participate in those programs. So not able to share too much of the details, but it will be out by Friday.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you. So I know there's always about, I don't know if this is questions or discussions. I'll just throw it out there and tell me if not. there's always a balance the city has to go through with redeveloping old things in order to get higher densities versus what we're talking about, like community trusts. And I guess for me, the positive of community trust would be that you have ownership and it is geared towards potentially people who are not at the highest income bracket. So I guess I look forward to seeing the information on Friday. But in general, if the timing of that is not, I guess that was the other question, timing-wise, if we increase density possibilities and we say that it's going to occur in these potential properties, if there's a group looking to do a community trust at that property, does it make it more expensive for them to do so?
Apologies. We can share some information which is already in the housing element. So, for example, the Community Ownership Action Plan has a time frame of June of 2025. So we will be making a recommendation to achieve that time frame, and out of that process, ideally, we'll be able to hopefully get the funding and help enable organizations who want to undertake that work. But to that, your next question, we believe that it could very well increase the cost of acquiring the units, and there has been some evaluation done in terms of the transactions that have occurred over the last few years, and the per unit cost could be anywhere from $400,000 to $600,000 per unit, just at the current density. If the densities were to be increased and there is development potential that is significantly added, then that could certainly impact the value of the sites.
Okay, thank you very much.
Commissioner Cranston.
So when you look at the original scope of R3, it kind of falls into the items 1 and 2 and 3. The housing element piece falls into number 4. This would clearly be going beyond either the original scope or the or what's required in the housing element. As you note in the initial thing here, it says this goal represents a major point of disagreement in the community. So I was curious why this question is being asked. Has there been communication from council that they want to do this already, or it's beyond the scope of what's with the original scope and what's required? So it wasn't clear to me where the source of this was.
I wouldn't say it wasn't part of the original scope. The questions that we were trying to resolve in the original scope were related to increasing density. And maybe I can ask Mr. Pellegrini with Opticos to talk a little bit about the council direction and council questions and kind of initial impetus of the project, and how it related to increased density, because that initial map that was prepared to address council comments and everything was a pretty substantial increase in density.
Thank you, Eric. Yes, when the project was conceptualized, there was a significant request to explore how an increase in stacked flats in R3 primarily could be produced. And that was in response to, prior to SB 330 and other actions that the city had taken at the time, that there were townhouse projects that were being proposed in R3 that were actually resulting in a net loss of units through redevelopment. And that was a big concern. So there was a question to understand what regulatory barriers were existing that were preventing those kinds of projects, instead of being proposed with townhouses, to be proposed with stacked flats. And a key part of that we found in our initial analysis of uncovering what some of the issues were with the existing zoning included some of the things that Eric had mentioned around setbacks and open space requirements, but we found that density was a key factor, particularly because there are a lot of parcels in R3 that actually are quite small. And so you actually hit the density limitations very quickly through only achieving sort of 2 to 3 units on a parcel. And we understood that these sort of moderate or modest increases in density would be necessary to sort of unlock the potential that the general plan saw, particularly on these smaller parcels.
So maybe a clarifying question. So my interpretation of the first round was if we wanted to outright encourage the tearing down existing buildings and putting up stack flats and said, this is what it would take. That was mine, and that sounds kind of like what you're saying, that if we actually want to intentionally tear down rent-controlled units, that weren't rent-controlled at the time, and turn them into stack flats, we would have to do that kind of density in order to make that happen.
I would say that the 2020 alternative, it did look at a variety of considerations in terms of the input that went into that map. But development feasibility was an important priority and key consideration that went into that map. And development feasibility at the time, there was a concern to think about how zoning could actually promote the redevelopment of sites, particularly that were seen to be at the end or nearing the end of their development life. These older projects that were going to start to have issues with renovation and upkeep and sort of needed kind of a sprucing up in the community. And so this sort of window of looking at those sites through this feasibility question really sort of helped inform that 2020 alternative.
I guess a related.
I would just add, it's the discussion at the time was not specifically, envisioning tearing down these buildings. It was creating opportunities, and we did not get into the details with the council around which are the kind of opportunity sites for new density and new development. And so whether or not the existing rent stabilized units, for example, were existing on sites that we might have on, say, the 2020 map proposed upzoning for, that was based on a much larger analysis of feasibility and neighborhood character, rather than specifically targeting buildings.
And I guess maybe a related question. It was, I don't remember whether it was stated explicitly or whether it was just my impression, that your predecessor at that time believed that that might be required in order to meet the housing element. And that part of that analysis was done that if for some reason we were not able to achieve the housing element through other means, that what other avenues did we have? Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate. At the time that we started R3, we thought that maybe it could be a kind of a backup approach for achieving the housing element in case other avenues didn't succeed.
Thanks.
And for my own part, I have just one question. It's a somewhat obscure question here on 5. The staff report says that redevelopment at higher densities would create opportunities for diverse unit types. Does that include, hopefully, greater availability, greater frequency of like 3-bedroom units, like the kinds of apartment units that are good for families with kids? That's one of the things I know we underproduce. I'm concerned about that. Should we expect that we will see, do the economics support when you go to greater density, more of those types of larger units? Is that a reasonable expectation?
It depends on so many factors besides density. It really does. We actually have a few projects that are proposing more larger units in a stacked configuration. But a lot of times those tend to be ownership projects that tend to prioritize the larger units. Also, they tend to be, because they're ownership projects, they tend to be smaller, like, fewer than 50 units developments. Although we are seeing some that are larger, that are, again, condos and larger numbers of bedrooms. Again, we also have our affordable housing program, which, targets money towards unit sizes that the community needs. You're right that the apartment projects that we've been seeing do tend to be in the studio 1-bedroom range. That's true in apartment projects that we're seeing these days. I don't know the economics of apartments at larger unit sizes. I don't know if Mr. Pellegrini knows anything about those development trends.
I would just say that, just to echo Eric's comments, it is typically there are challenges to producing large numbers of family units, and that sort of many developers will trend toward maximizing the number of units versus sort of going towards larger units, particularly in rental projects. There are many cities that incorporate regulatory requirements to sort of push some of those, and there are sort of measurable impacts to including some of those requirements.
So it sounds like targeted interventions are how we're going to make progress on that, not increase in density per se.
No. Yes.
Okay.
That's a good way to say it. Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. All right. Unless there are any other questions, I'm going to provide a time check. We're at 1 hour and 50 minutes. We still got to get through question 1 here. So having done questions, now we can do deliberation and votes. I'm going to hope that we can identify quickly what the low-hanging fruit here is that we all kind of agree on, so we can set that aside and focus on anything that we'd like to change if there is any such thing. So with the forbearance of my colleagues, I'll probably ask that straw poll question a whole bunch of times. Going through our draft goals, is there deliberation on draft goal 1? Anything in particular anyone wants to say? Anything in particular that anybody wants to change? Or are we just good with it? This is create opportunities for diverse unit types. I'm seeing that everybody looks okay with that. Okay. Moving to number 2, producing better design that reflects the community's vision through objective form-based standards, including but not limited to pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods, respectful transitions, and increased tree canopy. Is it the general consensus of the commission that we're okay with what we've got in the staff report? Fantastic. Number 3, creating opportunities for neighborhood-serving uses. Am I seeing consensus? We're happy with what we've got? Fantastic. Number 4, updating the R3 zoning district to be consistent with state law and the general plan while addressing housing element programs and improving development review. Do we have general consensus that we're happy with what we have in the staff report? No speakers? Okay. 4 for 4. And to 5, creating opportunities for increased densities in targeted areas if directed to do so by council. Is there any deliberation that we would like to have pertaining to goal 5? And by the way, once we get through 1 through 5, then we can, if we want to have general deliberation about question 1, then we'll go to a vote. So this won't be your last chance to say anything. Commissioner Cranston. Mike.
The way this is worded, what do we have to vote on? This says, great opportunities if directed to by council. Well, what's to vote on? Are we being asked to say, are we recommending to council that they do this or not? Because this, as worded, this is not a choice that this is more informational than a question?
It's a fair point.
Yeah.
What is this?
Semantically, yes, you're absolutely right. I would say that the intent of the question before the commission is, do you want this project to include density increases? And if you do, then forward that recommendation to the city council, and the goal will be that, one of the goals for this project will be include density increases in targeted areas.
So it is actually a question.
Yes.
Okay. Give everybody a minute. Looks like Commissioner Cranston, you're first.
I'm not supportive of this myself. It's not necessarily to meet the housing element. There's considerable capacity within the general plan already. The fact that it's so divisive in the community, I don't know why we would do this now ahead of something like the general plan or other activities down the road. It's not apparent to me why this is something we need to do at this point in time. So I'm not inclined to support this if it's actually a question.
Thank you, Mr. Cranston. Commissioner Clark.
So I am supportive of including this. I think there's really not much of a point in doing a lot of this if we don't at least look at targeted increases in density, not a wholesale everywhere on across R3 has increased in intensities, but I think there are key areas within R3 where it makes sense to at least study increased intensities to allow a greater mix of housing types and uses. And look, as folks have pointed out before, we don't have any more land. The only way to go is up. And the most sustainable way to grow is going up, and it doesn't have to be super, super high, and we have to be sensitive about transitions, but at the end of the day, the way that we're going to get additional open space and all the things that we're talking about as we grow and develop is to at least look at increased intensities in certain areas within R3. So I think it makes sense to include it and to study it as part of this overall project.
Commissioner Nunez.
Yeah, I am also supportive of the goal for increasing density in a targeted manner in the R3. I additionally am very curious about ways that we can incorporate some incentive structure to be able to provide for more parks. I continuously hear residents asking us to prioritize the delivery of new parks, and I think that sustainably growing upward, again with respect to sensitivity around kind of like height levels and such, but fundamentally being able to make sure we're creating more opportunities for housing and for parkland would be a fantastic thing in my book. Another thing I just wanted to note with regards to Commissioner Yin's question earlier around the community land trust, getting tongue-tied today. Yeah, so I work very closely with the Mountain View Solidarity Fund, who right now is actively I would say the leading group in regards to efforts to bring a community-owned housing in Mountain View. I can tell you from working with them every single day that our community wants an all of the above approach to housing, which incorporates supply, growth, in addition to funding and pathways for community ownership. None at the sacrifice of the other. So I just wanted to make sure, to whatever extent that was helpful, I was able to provide some behind-the-scenes insight on that front. But again, fully supportive of this, and also would like to see if it's feasible to explore opportunities for this to lend itself towards new parkland.
Commissioner Gutierrez, Vice Chair Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair. So when it comes down to this issue of targeted areas, I can see why we would be interested in doing that, to be able to study this and try and figure out feasibility. But at the same time, I want us to remember why it is that we're here in the first place, where you have, I think, up to a point, competing interests between our three proponents of advancing that versus housing element, or both at the same time, trying to do more of a holistic approach to try and figure out the housing situation that we have, which is in crisis. And I think we've got to be respectful of both the community members who've come in and said, hey, I don't want a big developed tower next to my single family home. I get that. We went through that a little, on the school board when we proposed teacher housing in Cooper Park. And that was brought up to us by Tamara Wilson as well when she submitted her email to the commission. But at the same time, let's not forget the displacement issue, where when we've had persons living in Mountain View, they were displaced, they had nowhere to go. And some who have still stayed, very few, are in shelters. So the reality of that dichotomy is real. That's not going anywhere. For those of you who have property, congratulations. That's great. You made the right choice because you could afford it. For those others who didn't have that chance for whatever reason, or who are new immigrants, their reality is completely different. So the more we can try and reconcile those differences and that dichotomy of how we live here in Mountain View and consequently in the United States, or in the state of California, in Santa Clara County specifically, because it's so darn expensive, if we can try and have that partnership between both elements to try and tackle housing at that higher level of discourse, then you get to being able to expand on partnerships to try and figure out how can you promote green space in parks, or schools. Future opportunities for growth will require, you would think, those types of necessities, the expansion of libraries as well, and infrastructure as a whole. And that's where it gets dicey, because we've got these competing interests. And frankly, when you look at it from that perspective, in the end, you're still, I don't want to say beholden to, but it's up in the arms still of the developer on whether or not they want to go ahead and propose something that's going to be beneficial for a certain part of the community. We don't have that much say in that. And I think that's where I get nervous, right? Because you can propose to do X, Y, Z, but in the end, if it doesn't happen, then what? And I bring this up, not to instigate, but just to bring everyone together around the common cause of affordable housing. Look what happened with Google. In the first 5 years, they said that they were going to pitch in to do X, Y, Z. Their relationship with the developer ended. Those targeted goals of having certain types of housing or parks are gone. Until they get that established partnership going again, we may not be able to make that targeted goal into a reality. So now we've got to let the HCD know, hey, guess what? We're a little bit behind the 8 ball. So I think having said that and used that as an example, I think we ought to also be prepared to try and figure out, when those setbacks happen, how are we going to address that with HCD? And how will we stay true with the housing element plan, where we had a lot of feedback from the community, but also take the feedback from those who are going to be affected if there's more density because their neighborhood situation is completely changed. And finally, having lived in Florida and Miami for a little while, I can tell you, and even Houston, that's a nightmare. When you have a single family residence and then a 6-tower residence of apartments or condos next to each other, there is no neighborhood feel to it, right? There's no rationale for building. You would think that there would be rationale for building consistently, positively, but in those cases, there isn't any. And that's not what we need here in Mountain View either. Thank you.
So I'd like to ask maybe a clarifying procedural question. Mr. Anderson, would you like the commission to take a vote, give you a sort of a sense of the commission? I know we're not taking any official action, but is that what the city would like to have from us? Or do you feel like just by hearing the deliberations, you're getting what you needed?
So the question is, does the EPC support Goal 5? You know, I think if there is nuance to that the EPC wants to collectively communicate to council, then we will absolutely communicate that. But you know, we are looking for an answer from the commission.
You do want a sense of the commission?
Yeah.
Okay, we can do that. So unless there are any other comments that my colleagues here would like to make, Commissioner Donahue? Yeah, sure. Go for it.
This is a tough one that I've been thinking about. I didn't really come in with any kind of preconceived notions. Of course, everyone has their own lived experience and kind of biases to some extent. But I've been tossing this around for a week here. And the reading through 100 pages of, I mean, I read through all that stuff, the 100 pages of comments. Yes, this is great. No, this is terrible. And it didn't really help. But a lot of the discussion tonight has helped, and some of the questions, I think. I think one of the interesting things is that it sounds like this Goal 5 started out as kind of a backup plan for potentially meeting the RENA numbers. The one thing that concerns me is that we're not done. In another 7 years, we're going to be back having to go through this again, and if we need to have something left, I think. So I guess I agree with Commissioner Cranston that if it's not required at this time, I would not be in support of it. Thanks.
Commissioner Yin.
Yeah, thank you, colleagues. I think that the discussion has been very helpful. I think I was really sitting on the fence on this one a little bit. And I actually am leaning towards Commissioner Cranston and Commissioner Donahue's take on this one, but there is nuance. I do see all the benefits of having density. I do worry a little bit that if we're taking away some of the development standards that, like open space and setbacks, that typically developers will then maximize what they can do. Given the timing of the community trust, I think I am not in any hurry to jump towards density. A city is a living, breathing thing. It lives on beyond us. And if it is not necessary, it wasn't purported to be necessary as part of the housing element, I can see why we would wait on that, get some feedback, get council's input. If they really feel like they want to move forward on it, then, you know, I would say we do a precise plan, because if we're going to do higher densities, and I see all the benefits of that, I would like to be thoughtful, well thought out, well planned, and holistic based on the community that it's in. We have large swaths of R3, and they're chunks enough to form like enough land for a precise plan, I think. And they are very different throughout the city and what they touch. So I am all for a city growing. It doesn't have to be here and now, right now. It does take time, and I think it takes thoughtfulness, and a precise plan is like the most thoughtful way of doing so. That may ensure as much of the benefits that we can get out of density. I guess I'll put it that way. So given that, if I were to just say yes or no on this, I'm leaning towards no. But that's not to say we don't do so in the future, that we can take a look at it, and if we do so, then we do it in a very thoughtful way. Does that help? Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Yin. So this is a hard one. I almost feel like I'm being asked to answer two different questions. There's the question as written here in the staff report, and then there's this larger question about how do you feel about sort of voluntarily pursuing additional density. So let me answer both. As the question's written here in the staff report, and that's what shapes our dialogue while we're up here. That's our job, is to answer the questions as put to us. This is, for me, a fine way to think about increasing density if directed to do so by the council. If the council would like that, the council should have it. And I think what you've got here, yeah, that seems reasonable enough to me, if that's the conversation the council wants to have. So if that's the question you're asking me to answer, that's my response. This is a fine way to do it if the council asks for it. If you're asking that larger question about how do we think about voluntarily pursuing additional density beyond what's required in order to comply with state law and what we think is in the housing element, this one's tough. This one's really tough for me because additional density, it has a cost. It has a real cost, and displacement is one of many types of costs that come with it, because I think there's a lot of folks, you have to leave for 3 years while they work on the building. Your kids are going to be in a new school district potentially, and you're not going to want to move them again. Like, we lose people when we do that. For the folks that aren't moving, traffic is a real thing. I saw when I read the 120, whatever it is, pages worth of comments. There's a lot of folks worried about congestion and traffic and all the other, and not being able to find a parking space, all those other things. So there is a cost to density, and maybe we'll talk about this later, but I hope that when we're thinking about criteria, and I'm kind of jumping ahead and breaking my own rule, but like when we talk about criteria for density, I hope one of the things we talk about as a criteria, what some of the costs are that come with that. So having kind of spoken out of both sides of my mouth here, I guess I would probably fall lightly on the side of not being supportive of more voluntarily pursued density. I'm actually totally open to it. I just would like to see it a little bit more grounded about exactly what it is we'd be getting. That's enough from me. You said that you wanted to vote. I'm willing to entertain a motion. Or yes, sir.
I wasn't clear if the vice chair actually voiced an opinion one way or the other. I didn't understand if you did.
Yeah, well, that's the situation that I find myself in, right? Because it's just what you brought up. It's like, why ask the question? I don't get it. I'm no disrespect intended, Eric. Don't get me wrong, but because I figured, well, if it's directed to do so by council, they're going to do what they're going to want to do. Yeah. So why ask us? Because we're just here, I don't know, trying to figure this out as best as we can. So, I don't know how to answer that, right? If I were to, and I don't want to be a weasel about it, but if I'm thinking about Robert's Rules of Orders and I'm looking at this question, I abstain. Because I'm not city council. They're going to let me know what they want to think. So the question's already kind of like, why answer it if it's already being told that if they want to go this way? I don't see how we could affect the way that they're going to think about that.
Commissioner Nunez, go ahead.
Just a quick question. Just functionally speaking, bouncing off Commissioner Gutierrez, Vice Chair Gutierrez's comment, and get used to that. Is it functionally, like, are we within our realm or scope of considering the question almost as if directed by council part, we could almost, like, for our purposes here, redline that, and if we were to either support or not support it in whatever transmittal we send to council, like, just, is that, could we consider that a typo in essence?
If I
yes,
may,
ma'am.
Thank you.
Please do.
Dawn Cameron, Acting Assistant City Manager and Community Development Director. So again, the intent of the question was to allow you to advise the City Council on whether you recommend they include this goal as part of the R3 project. Apologies that the way the question was worded led to this kind of confusion. I think what staff was, I know what we were trying to say here was that this goal is a discretionary decision that will be made by council. As indicated previously, it's not part of the housing element in terms of meeting our RENA requirements. So we were trying to be clear that ultimately the council is going to have to make a decision and give direction to staff. As you're seeing here, it's going to be a challenging decision, and there's a lot of factors for council to consider. So what staff has placed before you tonight is to give you an opportunity to advise council, make a recommendation to council, and again, this is a study session, so it's not really a formal motion. It's more what the consensus is of whether you would advise council to include this goal in the future work for R3 or not include it. I hope that helps clarify.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Commissioner Cranston, go ahead.
So the actual question, number one, says, what feedback does EPC have on the goals for their project? And the second part is, does EPC support goal 5? So that is in fact an explicit question as opposed to the wording of bullet 5. So if I interpret that as what we were asked, then we are being asked to provide a specific opinion back. And so I think we're okay, Commissioner Nunez, if we actually answer that question.
That seems like a fair enough reading to me. You've definitely gotten our feedback for sure, so that's settled. You did say you wanted to vote. I think everybody's had a chance to talk. I'm checking to see nobody else has more they want to add. I am willing to entertain a motion. Just you want to straw poll it? Okay. As I was taking notes, it sounded like I heard four commissioners that were not interested in sort of supporting goal 5. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of nuance in there, but just at its base, I heard 4. Does that sound accurate to everybody? So we'll call that one sort of a 3 to 4 in support. So, oh, did you want to abstain? So that we'll call that a 3-3 and 1. As a, you know what? Let's go person by person. I want to get this right since I'm a new chair and I don't want to screw up my first night on the job. Commissioner Clark, can I just call you by name and we'll go through and people can tell me what they. Oh, we can do Vince. Okay, everyone in favor of including. I see 2. Against. I see 4. Abstain. And that's the abstain. That's 1. Thank you, Commissioner Clark. That was helpful. Eric, did you get what you need?
Yes, thank you.
Fantastic. All right, time check. We're 2 hours and 15 minutes in, and we got 3 left. Let's do question 2, project phasing. Oh, Commissioner Clark.
It was about phasing.
Oh, let's.
It's mostly a question, but.
Let's do questions, and then we'll do deliberation.
I think we just greatly simplified the rest of the meeting, but let me know. So I guess the phasing here is, you know, the combined approach, which was if we were increasing densities. I assume you'll. I guess. Is there any point in considering number 2? In case the council does go another
direction. The council might go another
Okay.
direction. I'm sure they'd like to hear your.
So then I do have a question about that, which is the combined approach adds, it looks like 3-ish months to everything 18 to 24 versus 15 to 20, and you noted that that might extend beyond the end of 2025 when we were hoping to have this done, at least from an HCD perspective. So my question is, if if we demonstrate to HCD that we're pretty far along, we're making progress, are they going to be somewhat forgiving if we decide to take this approach, or is it like a no, how dare you sort of thing?
So, it's our goal to reach out and to figure out the answer to that question. And, just generally the answer to that question. Oh, and I think our city attorney has her hand raised, so I will turn it over to her.
Hi, everyone. See, I can turn on my camera, but I can't tell if I'm showing or not. I can only see on my screen. I can only see the question too. But I just wanted to say that that's a very difficult question to answer and a common question. I think that what we'd like to say is that, yes, if we are making progress and working in good faith to achieve the housing element goals, that HCD would be willing to work with the city and wouldn't want to just cut us off, when we're very close to reaching a goal. But, right now we're in a new area and it's really hard to say what type of enforcement action HCD will take and how, harsh or lenient they may be in that context. So I don't think that it's intended as a scare tactic. It's sort of intended to just let you know that it's a possibility that we might go past a deadline, and we will have to work with HCD, and hopefully we will be able to impress upon them that we are working in good faith to meet that deadline and very close, and we will be okay. But I think that's the best we can give you right now as we're working with HCD and trying to get more information.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Commissioner Donahue.
Unlike the previous question, I did have kind of more of a preconceived notion on how my thoughts on this. I'm a process guy, and I think I want to be sure to follow the correct process. And I think missing deadlines that are in the housing element doesn't sound like a good idea. If the soonest that the combined approach could be done is, I think, 20 months, and the deadline is 20 and a half months from now or something like that, that's not a recipe for success. So I would be in favor of of splitting it. The splitting it also was described as allowing a more thoughtful process, and more thoughtful, and it meets the housing element timelines. Of course, the combined approach would save money, but I think that it's important to do things the right way, even if it costs a little more money. Thanks.
Commissioner Cranston.
So I guess I'm worried about hitting the deadlines as well. The other factor that comes to mind is one of the things we've seen as we've talked about the housing element is as soon as people think, oh, it's next to me, they freak out, okay? And even if they don't know what it's going to be. And my worry about the combined approach is when will you know what areas you're going after? It strikes me that it would be difficult to have the rational discussions about the things that the form-based approach. What do we need to do to meet to match the R3 standards to the general plan? If it's combined, somehow you've got to take that step early to say that in that first bubble that says, where is it going to be? Somehow that has to happen sooner, otherwise it'll be very difficult to get through the rest of the stuff, in my view. So it's not clear to me if the combined approach, how you do that, okay? Because I think the stuff that's in the mandated tasks actually can probably happen in a relatively orderly manner. I'm actually a little surprised it's going to take as long as it will. And so that's my biggest worry, is that we get distracted on the stuff that we have to do, because everybody's like, wait, is that next to me? Wait, and if we don't know yet, it means that we have longer meetings because we're answering questions that we don't actually know the answer to. So that's my biggest worry about the combined approach, is that until we get some clarity on where you might look and how you might approach it, it will become a distraction on the required tasks. If we can get into the time, I'm not comfortable with missing the timeline, the dates, but that's my biggest worry about the combined approach. We still need to get the required stuff done. How do we make sure we do that?
If there's not more questions, we can just go straight to deliberation for this item. Anybody have anything they want to say? Commissioner Yin.
I was going to reiterate what Commissioner Cranston was going to say. Normally, I do appreciate efficiency, and that seems to be the benefit of the combined approach. However, my concern is similar to yours, and really when I look at Table 2, the benefits of the phased approach allows for what I was talking about earlier, to do something like a precise plan for the different areas so that we're really getting into what works. And if we are going to move around the densities, we could do a very more thorough approach and thoughtful approach to the communities that are surrounding them. And I think, you'd be surprised if the density is farther away, you might get more than you expected, central and lower, closer to the single families, than if you just whole hog up the zoning in that area. So I think there are a lot of potentials if we go with a very thoughtful approach in phased.
Thank you, Commissioner Yin. Any other deliberative comments before we straw poll this? Maybe I'll just say a couple of things. Legal compliance is a very big deal for me. As a lawyer, that's the kind of thing that gives me cold sweats and stuff. And the comment would likely not meet the housing element timelines was probably the thing I circled most in the staff report. I take that very seriously. I do wish I had more, sort of a more fulsome discussion in the staff report of why exactly we thought that was true. I know we could probably get real close to the deadline, but in general, I think things like this tend to always take longer rather than come in, under budget and with extra time. So I would be worried that this could easily end up being 5, 6, 8 months in arrears, and that kind of thing sort of terrifies me. Conversely, there's a number of questions and projects and stuff that have been significantly delayed. And I know there's folks that are very anxious to see those done. And, COVID intervened and delayed some of that work, and there's only so much that staff can do. And so I'm mindful of that, but I also know there's some impatience about getting some of these things done. I think I'll always pick caution first. And so that I would probably sort of regretfully find myself in the phased camp, because I think that's safer. But I really would like to see us get all this stuff done and get it done quickly. And I almost wish we could have a separate conversation about, is there anything we have to pull out of it that's not really important, so we can streamline what it is we need to get done. I wish it didn't take that long. But I guess that's sort of my feelings. I would regretfully put myself in the phased camp. Commissioner Yin, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Okay. Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair Dempsey. So I would rather do the combined approach if we could, but I'm understanding of the phased approach. The thing is that you know, the last meeting that we had in terms of meeting compliance for legality, you all voted on something that I wasn't able to participate in, and that was kind of sketchy because we're not too sure about the legality behind the wording or the phrasing behind the homeless shelters perspective. So I'm not sure how these are, how we can take into consideration the issue of legality to when in general we're hypothesizing the best we can on how to answer a question. So having said that, look, there's no guarantee that either approach is going to make it on the timelines based here. So what's the plan in case we realize either with the phased approach or the combined approach that we're not going to make the deadline? Are we still going to reach out to HCD? And if so, by when? By when will we know? Because if we're not going to want to be not compliant with a said deadline, then we better have a plan for either one to be able to detect by said date. It looks like we're not going to make it. What's the plan on that front?
Any other comments from the commission? Eric?
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, that these projects move forward in kind of iterative ways that makes it hard to predict those, you know, those scenarios. But, you know, we take the comment to heart that we should be planning for the potential of delays and having a strategy for the potential of delays. So thank you for the comment.
So as a follow-up, either way, if there is a delay, there'll be a plan for you all to then notify EPC, City Council, hey, we're not going to make our targeted date. We're going to reach out to HCD, and this is what we're going to do. When you realize that you may not make the deadline. In other words, when will you find out whether or not you're going to make a deadline? By month 18, 16, 14, 12?
I don't think we can answer that question right now, but it's certainly something that we will continue to have discussions about through the course of the project implementation.
Okay.
Okay, and just for clarification, Mr. Anderson, you would like a straw poll so you can get the numbers here about phased versus combined?
Yeah, that'd be great. Although I think I heard 4 phased already, but a straw poll.
Let's everybody who wants phased approach. 1, 2, 3, 4, and combined. 1, 2, 3. There you go. All right, on to question number 3. Find my notes here. All right, questions related to item number 3. And we're going to look and see what the question was. What densities and which character subdistricts should be included in developing alternatives that staff will bring back to EPC and council for consideration at a later date? Do we have questions of staff? Commissioner Crescent.
I kind of read this as this is the phase 1 stuff, and the question 4 is the phase 2 or combined stuff. Is that, or is this, do we have to be answering both phases at the same time?
So yes, we are in case council directs us to do the combined approach, having this direction or having this recommendation from the EPC now on if we are increasing densities, if we are doing a combined approach, is there input on the range of densities that might be appropriate?
So this only applies if they decide to move ahead with the increased opportunity. We're not talking about how we look at it on the normal stuff.
Sorry, repeat the question.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding what we're going to tell you here. Okay.
Yeah.
This is because some of these things I looked at this like, okay, these might apply in the required items, and some of them I might answer them a different way if they're part of the additional items. And so I'm not clear what question you're actually asking us to answer.
So D1 and D2 are essentially discretionary densities. If the commission, if the council is supportive of increasing densities, is there, you know, would the commission want us to cap it at D1? Would the commission want us to cap it at D2? Would the commission want us to go higher than D2 to East Wisman or North Bayshore type densities? I mean, maybe the commission, you know, we already know what the commission would say about this, but, and so it might be a little challenging to provide this comment, but it may also help if you have feedback or questions about the districts themselves that can kind of help clarify as we iterate on this, what these districts mean, what they include, and is this the right way to organize districts in the R3 zone?
Okay, and just I'm going to interject here for a second. So would you be content if you hear us out, we'll have our comments individually about each of the different types. Would that give you what you need, or again, do you want us to go through and provide you with a vote for, you know, D1, for D2, for low medium density? I want to make sure that we know exactly what the question is being posed to us so we can answer correctly and knowledgeably.
I think you know, you can go through some comments and see if there are salient themes that come out through the individual commissioners' comments. Those, you know, if you can develop those into, you know, recommendation to council, there may be themes around specific sub-districts to include or densities to peak at. And so we might just want to start with seeing what the commissioners have to say, and then see if there's any kind of collective commission recommendation in there.
That sounds fair. Commissioner Nunez.
Is it fair to then interpret this question as, in the event that, regardless of what the commission said, council wants to do higher density in R3, here's what the PC thinks about the...
That's a fair interpretation,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then, in that vein, I'll go ahead and provide some commentary on that. One of the neighborhood I happen to live in, Shoreline West, it's a particularly interesting neighborhood, I think, for the reason, and I guess Old Mountain View too, but Shoreline West, you can walk down the street and the height envelopes they feel very well blended in. There are plenty of single family homes next to 6 to 12 unit rental buildings and a lot of foliage. You can't really, there's no, I went to Houston one time, and the hotel I was staying in was across from a gas station, which was across from a single family home, which was across from like a barren lot. So that is not what the Shoreline West neighborhood feels like. And so I think in terms of having that inform what the outer peripheries of the R3 as it's edging towards like R1, if we're thinking about sensitivities of residents there, that might be one thing that we might want to think about. From my less sensitive vantage point, I'm very happy to say, you know, hey, R3D2, what can you get out of developers if you can incentivize that? What can you extract? What can you put into the city coffer if you're maximizing opportunities of that type in return for something that the city can get? Aside from that, I'm also happy with that that D1 as a kind of more kind of like regular higher tranche, with the D2 being that kind of like incentive tranche, probably maximized towards the cores of R3, again, away from the kind of like peripheral nearing R1 zones. So that's my commentary on that.
Commissioner Donahue.
So I have a question about R3 D2 versus R4. What are the differences? I mean, R4 is a floating zone, but what are the differences? Kind of, you know, if something were developed, how would they be different?
Well, we haven't gotten there yet. You know, they'd be about the same density, and so there might be criteria or benefits or streamlining or something like that that could happen in the R3 zone. Once we develop the R3 zone, so there's kind of two paths that could happen, right? One path could be council simply says, get rid of the R4 zone and just do R3D2, right? We're gonna change how we're doing these high density zones. Another possible path is we'll do the R3D2 zone, look at it, compare it to R4, see if there are still benefits to having them both around, and then keep R4 as that kind of still that floating zone that somebody could elect to or could ask for or do a gatekeeper in order to use.
Okay, so if they're comparable, it's just basically sounds kind of like just taking the R4 zone and just applying it to specific, like not making it floating. I mean, it could still be floating, but you'd have some specific things that are not floating.
Right, but we'd be developing standards specifically within the R3 rubric, right? So a form-based set of standards that's based on building types, that's based on you know, the definitions and standards that we develop through this process, you know, and that would be applied to the R3D2 zone. The R4 zone has an FAR, it has you know, setbacks, it's got open area requirements, it's got all of these things that's going to continue to exist if ultimately council decides that they want it to continue to exist.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Commissioner Yin.
I had a question. I think I knew the answer, but I'll ask it anyways. If an area is looked at, like we take R3, is looked at in total, for each property owner, they've got a certain amount of development rights. Can we look at the whole area in total as how much development is on it and move it around regardless of property?
So there's a couple of different ways to answer that question. One is the SB 330 question, which is, yes, SB 330 prohibits us from doing downzoning, but we are allowed to downzone if we also upzone somewhere else. I'm not sure if you're also asking about, say, a strategy of distributing density within a site, or, you know, doing some kind of, you know, like let's say you want somebody to build a park and kind of focusing density, that all the density for that site in one portion of the site so that you can build a park on the other portion. Is that
something like that? Or if the area next to, let's say, a different zone, you want it to be less than, and you can move, it's almost like development rights in a way. You just move it over to a different place and they get higher density than they would have otherwise been allowed.
Okay, well, transfer of development rights is another strategy that has been used to preserve buildings and do other things. It can be very complicated, and I think that you know, if that's something that the commission and the council is interested in us looking into, we can look into it. And those complications tend to make it difficult to do in circumstances like this, but it could be a possibility. I think probably the most effective transitions approach, if that's a concern that you have, is really just having your general plan designations be sensitive to the adjacent zoning districts, the adjacent general plan designations. And we can do that by, we may be able to downzone in some places if we upzone in others. We don't want to create non-conforming uses, non-conforming densities. That there are some drawbacks to that, but we can certainly look into that as a strategy.
Okay, thank you. Because I was just thinking that, I'm not sure about the very last R3D 2 or 1, but I do kind of like the variation from the very first. If we do get from council that they want to add density, for sure, this is where we're going, regardless of the recommendations from EPC. I think having a variety works well if we're moving around in order to get what the community would prefer. Utilizing the different typologies.
Commissioner Cranston.
So what's the impact to staff if we say R3D2 and R4 become the same thing? Does that change your timeline? Does it make it easier? Does it make it harder?
No, doesn't change it.
My own, I like the sense of order. We're doing R2 plus all the way through R3, and we got this thing out there called R4, and we got something that kind of looks and smells like R4. It's like, if it's easier for you to say, hey, we got some standards that you can kind of marry into it, and maybe it's actually easier. I'm kind of looking at it like, why would we not just make R4 part of this? And D2 becomes R4. And it's the high density zoning project, not just R3. If council decides that they want to do something, if we recommend that, does that give you heartburn?
Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't give me heartburn. No, I think that is certainly an option. And if the EPC wants to make that recommendation, and if council wants to go in that direction, to just say, hey, notice this, like you are turning all the R4s into R3D2s, right? Talk to all the R4 property owners as though they are eventually going to be rezoned into R3D2. I think that is great direction that we can move forward on and take action on. It doesn't change the fact that in the end, once you're looking at the two districts side by side and creating and looking at opportunities for incentives that might be associated with one district or another, there may be a reason to keep R4. And we can make that decision at the end of the line. We don't need to predetermine that. But if the intention is to replace R4 with R3D2, it'd be good to know that so that we can work with the property owners and notice appropriately.
And I just have one question. I think I already know the answer to it, but I'll ask it anyway. The story description for each of these, that's not counting density bonus, right?
Sorry, which description?
So for
the stories,
for D1 and D2, 4-story,
the height.
6-story, that's not counting density bonus, right?
No, it would not count density bonus. Although, as I said before, part of the goal here is to create some breathing room within the standards for density bonus. So, hopefully, again, we can't promise anything because developers can basically ask for whatever waivers they want. But hopefully it's not like a proportional height increase because they can be flexible in other ways on the site.
If there's no more questions, we can just go straight to deliberation. If anyone has any comments, insights that they'd like to share. Commissioner Cranston.
I think R3D2 and R4 should be the same thing. So the rest of the table 4, if we're going to head down this path, what you've outlined in table 4 makes sense to me in its general outline. And I just, to me, the only change is R4 and R3D2 becomes the same thing. That would be my recommendation.
Got it. Commissioner Gutierrez.
I agree with Commissioner Cranston.
All right. Commissioner Donahue.
I agree as well.
Are we rolling that together?
If we're going down that path, let's do it.
Okay. Further comments? Anybody else? Going once, going twice. I'll just say I too like the idea of consolidation. If it looks and smells like an R4, maybe it ought to be an R4. Commissioner Nunez, though, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like mentioned, I'm going to be the one saying, what are we even answering here? Excuse me for getting lost in the sauce. Yeah, I mean, that R3D2 is pretty ugly, I think. I mean, I think there's like nicer R3D2s that, I think we could have in our city. I don't think anyone here would be surprised if I said I was in favor of an R5. So, yeah, that's where I'm at.
Further comments? Commissioner Yin?
I think if it makes everything easier and there's no difference, go for it. I don't quite understand yet the benefit of the R4 to be done in the future, but if it allows you guys some flexibility in doing things, then I'm okay with it.
So it sounds like we have pretty clear consensus that there's that combination or elimination of redundancy would be appropriate. I don't know if you want to straw poll that, Eric. Oh, Chris, did you? Go ahead, Chris.
No, I don't have anything to add. I'll wait and see whether there's, at the end of this, whether there's any reason to keep R4 around. I don't want to prejudge that. I feel like we're a year from that. But I do agree with the sentiment that simple is better in that particular case. I just don't know what the implications of eliminating R4 and just doing R3D2 would be. I am fine with the other questions that you'd asked. If council does want to go into additional density and intensities, looking through D1 and R3 D1, R3 D2, probably not beyond that. That was one of the questions that was in here. I think we may need to look at some of those overlay areas. I don't know how legacy those overlays are, and maybe there were very good reasons for them, but I'm not sure we need to get into that tonight. Yeah, those are all my comments.
Thank you. And I'll just say for myself, I generally favor simpler is better. I like internally consistent rather than something that to folks who aren't professional planners might be confusing to them as why are these two different things that kind of do the same thing. I will also say, and I think Commissioner Yin, you said this earlier, I generally am in favor of more options and more flexibility and giving more choices, putting more choices forward to council for when they start deciding how they want to do things. I think the more options and building blocks they have to play with, the better. So, yes, sir. Commissioner Donahue.
Well, I know Commissioner Clark didn't want to go there, but I do actually, at the risk of going back to questions, the overlays, are those going to be reevaluated or eliminated as part of this process, even if it's a goal 5 or is rejected? The state mandated process, will that change the overlays?
At this point, it's difficult to say, kind of at the fine grain of those overlays, how they might end up. If, as I said, under SB 330, we can downzone areas if we also upzone areas. And if the council determines that those overlay areas are important enough to preserve, then they would have to identify enough areas to upzone to compensate. The challenge with the overlay areas is that those one-story overlays are very difficult to enforce with state density bonus and with the kind of consistency standards between the existing general plan designation and that one-story overlay. So from a character perspective and setting standards that are based on that intended character, you would have to lower the general plan designation in order to maintain that one-story overlay.
Okay, and the one-story overlays are there to be compatible with adjacent R1 uses, which are, I believe, allowed in generally to be higher than one story, which seems kind of backwards.
Yeah, I made a quick map. I don't know how well you can see this. Oh, it's a little hard to see. Sorry about that. But you can see the yellow areas are the R1 one-story overlays, and they're actually not adjacent to any of the R3 one-story overlays, which are in kind of a salmon color. So yes, with the exception of a little area on Whitney Drive, but it's also surrounded by R1 that is allowed to go two-story on that site. So pretty much all of these one-story overlays are adjacent to single-family homes that can go to 2 stories.
Yeah, that seems kind of that seems at least strange to me. I mean, I could see an argument for a 2-story overlay, I guess, but anyway, yeah, reevaluating the overlays seems reasonable to me.
And Commissioner Cranston, go ahead.
I guess, in my mind, if the zoning includes transition elements in it, on how do you deal from transitions from an area, that the overlays would effectively become unnecessary. If there's components in it that say this is how you transition from one zone to the next, I would hope you could essentially describe how the overlays are no longer needed. So I wasn't particularly worried about the overlays because I've seen other, I think in the El Camino Precise Plan, there are transition elements, others have those, and those accomplish something similar to what the overlays do. I'm familiar with the little weird one in Montaloma, and it's really just there to ensure step-ups. And so other plans have done that. So I'm not super worried about it myself because I think I'm confident our planning team can deal with the transitions. So that's my comment.
And perhaps I'll just say for myself, I'll plus one with what Commissioner Donohue's talking about here. I have to admit, the question that came up for me as listening to this and looking at this map is, why do we have these? And transitions, that's one good reason to have it. I just hope that, again, in the spirit of keeping things simple and intelligible to folks on the outside, we're using we keep these around because they're useful, not because they're historical artifacts. I'd love to know one day the history of why we have a overlay map that looks like this. So that's enough of that. Staff, did you get everything you need from us on this question?
So I did get a lot of comments. Well, certainly the commission kind of a majority of the commission agreed with Commissioner Cranston's sentiment that if the council wants to include R3D2, then it should take the place of R4, or at least that should be our intention through the project. As far as answering the question specifically, some commissioners touched on it and others did not. I don't see any other kind of themes with the majority of the commission.
Okay. Can you bring back up slide 2 that showed the 5? I would like to suggest that one thing that may be helpful is this is the range of densities and character subdistricts that staff is saying could be then used in putting together the alternatives, eventually leading to the maps. So one way to look at this is, does this look like a good set of densities and subdistricts to work with to give you enough puzzle pieces as you put together the map, knowing that R3D1 and R3D2 will be more dependent upon the concept of council saying, yes, we want to look at increasing densities overall. But do you feel that this is a good range to be looking at and considering, or would you have feedback on, additional or less, or in terms of what we bring to council?
That's helpful, Don. Thank you. Commissioner Nunez.
Yes.
Commissioner Cranston.
So what I'm looking at is table 4, which is this explained. If that's what you mean, then table 4 I'm comfortable with. I can't tell what you mean by just this chart. But table 4 says in the R1, in the medium low density R2, it will become R3A in general. If you look at the medium density residential, it will become R3B in general. That mapping is what I'm looking at in my interpretation of it. So if that's what you're asking, then
that is a correct interpretation. This was meant to just be a cheat sheet to table 4.
Our table 4 is what I'm actually.
What we're asking, yes.
Well clarified. Any other comments? Maybe we'll straw poll this. Is everybody okay with what's in table 4, given the clarification that, I almost called you Senator, Commissioner Cranston, it's getting late, it's 10 o'clock, you got promoted. Subject to the clarification about R4 that Commissioner Cranston raised, is everybody okay with table 4? Let me see some hands. Boom. We're good, that's 7-all. The time is now, it's time check, 10 o'clock. We're in 3 hours. And now let's get to question 4. All right, I'm going to read the question and then we're going to answer it. Question 4. What feedback does the Planning Commission have on the criteria for where to locate higher densities and commercial uses? Questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Cranston.
So it's alluded to on the little list of things on page 23, realistic growth capacity. One of the chart maps that you included in here at my request, thank you, was map number 1. And because when you simply look at R3, there's some of these really big blocks that, oh, by the way, when CSFRA was passed, all of a sudden the landlords went out and said, I'm going to turn them into townhomes, and all of a sudden you now have an area that's actually much more heavily townhomes and actually could be very difficult to develop. And so the out here on this realistic growth capacity, to me, is something, if I were council saying I want to do this, I would suggest that they look at it and say, where can you actually get what you want to do? And if you've got an area there's a little spot here that's an apartment, a little spot here, it's surrounded by all these townhomes, your ability to actually get that density would seem to me to be limited. And it's not called out in your tables, but the realistic growth capacity seems like something that they should consider when they're looking at these and saying, okay, if there's places where you could do a bunch of this together, that makes more sense than something that's very, very fragmented, or an area that's like all super small lots. Okay, so it's hard to bring lots together. So those areas that are divided into a lot of little small parcels, or those that have before SB 330 kicked in became, very heavily townhomes, And I mean, the city attorney can tell me, but as far as I know, effectively an HOA never can go away because you'd have to have a majority vote of everybody in HOA to say, tear everything down and start over, which is never going to freaking happen. So HOAs are there. They're never going to redevelop. So if you're going to do this, pick an area that you actually have a shot, would be my, it was just one little, three little thing here, and it doesn't feel like it was, I would have made that a bigger deal.
Yeah, so if I understand you correctly.
Is that something we can include?
Yeah, so you're basically adding a criteria of, for increased density of a neighborhood where the preponderance of parcels could feasibly redevelop into that increased density.
Right.
Yeah.
So that we could include that.
Yep, absolutely.
Commissioner Gutierrez, Vice Chair Gutierrez.
Oh, I'm good. Yeah. I was listening to what the senator was saying, and I like the perspective, but I wanted to ask you a question while I can here. So what's your take on overall growth capacity? Why would you just focus in on realistic growth but not also include overall growth? What's your take on that, or would you?
I think they're combined, but if you look at, when I looked at map 1, okay, the pure R3 map shows big sections that are all orange, okay? When you then drill underneath it and say, what can't be redeveloped? All of a sudden, some of those big blotches of orange are like, well, okay, you've got a little piece here and a little piece here surrounded by a bunch of HOAs and a little piece here. Can you really get much out of that? Because it's going to be hard to do. So overall growth, yes, but if you're going to, if they're going to say we're going to do this, then you should do it somewhere where you can actually achieve it. So overall growth, yes, but also achievability of what you said. If you're going to have staff go off and look at it, and they say, okay, I mean, there's one neighborhood that's like everything looks like it's a single-family parcel size,
right?
And trying to get that to all agree to turn it into something, you know, R4-ish, it's consolidating lots, as we've seen, is really hard to do. So the chances of that happening, if you look at it just as a big orange box, it could be. But it means you've got to get half a dozen HOAs, single-family homeowners, all together to say, I want to do that whole thing, which so its probability of success seems lower.
Okay. See, and the reason why I asked that is because when I looked at it, I thought the flip side, which was, all right, so if I'm in an HOA and I've got like a condo or townhome or what have you, and there's like a certain number of us, and then all of a sudden there's an ability to just, you know, agree to something and sell, make a little bit of profit, and then move to the other side of town, why wouldn't I want to do that?
I've been on an HOA board, and trying to get members of the community to agree on shit is
on stuff. Yeah, I
language,
totally agree.
language.
Totally agree.
Agree on things is really hard. Okay, so I apologize to the community for my language. But I mean, we have another HOA member here. He can probably tell you what it's like to corral the cats to get a decision. I mean, they won't even agree on, hey, we got a leak in the roof, we should fix the roofs.
Well, no, I get it, but because I saw him shaking his head too, Chris, like thinking maybe what I was thinking, but I don't know what he was thinking. So could you share why you?
Commissioner Clark.
Oh, sure. There would be instances where, the very first tiny little condo that I owned was in a soft story structure that's probably, I won't say where, but, you know, it's not in great shape. The amount that they will have to collect and spend to upgrade it eventually will be too much for them, and so they would probably be open to a redevelopment opportunity, someone to come in and buy out the. Also, what you see happen with some of those older units is someone will start buying up the units to get to 50 plus 1%, and then they control the HOA. So it's not impossible, but I do agree with you that it's highly unlikely if it's not a 60-year-old building or something like that.
Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you. I'm done. I'm good. Thank you.
Commissioner Nunez.
All right. Clearly, HOAs bring out the best in humanity. But I do have some questions around the criteria 1 and 2. I'm just kind of trying to reconcile those. Are you asking us to pick, do we like criteria 1 or 2, or like, are we saying we like all of this as options for council to have on the table? What's like the, just point of clarification on that.
Yeah, I think the most meaningful input from the EPC here would be, feedback on the individual criteria and, as Cranston identified, additional criteria. So if there is a criterion that you think is not important, let us know. This is going to be most beneficial when we can weed out the unimportant ones and promote the important ones.
Okay. Along those lines, then, with regards to neighborhood commercial, I love the idea of major artery road facing, right? Kind of like the California street market being one example. I'm really supportive of the public transit component. Employment areas, not so much. I think that it's possible to have people go to the corner store or a coffee joint, and that doesn't necessarily have to be next to some industrial park, in my view. And then with regards to Commissioner Cranston's point around the parcel component, I agree with that sentiment as a general concern around viability of development when it does require consolidation of multiple interests into one. So however that gets resolved, I'd be supportive of finding solutions for that, especially as it pertains to making some of the higher densities more viable.
Commissioner Donahue.
I agree with Commissioner Nunez on some of these things. Access to public transit, I think, is more important than, say, access to employment areas. I think that people change jobs, people need access to commercial areas, but people need access to a kind of a multitude of commercial opportunities, right? They go to the grocery store, but then they need to go buy clothing or something. So I think the public transit is what enables them to get to something that's beyond what is very close and walkable. So I would highly favor the public transit item somewhat over commercial areas and definitely over employment areas. Major corridors, as he said, I agree with that, and I think most of the other comments that he made.
Vice Chair Gutierrez.
So I like the idea that Commissioner Cranston mentioned in terms of real estate growth capacity, because I was looking at overall growth capacity originally, and I thought, well, maybe I can combine that with realistic growth capacity. But once he brought that up, I figured, well, I should ask for clarity's sake, because then the goal here is to try and create something that's more positive and that can be at a higher level impact so that City Council can ponder and think yeah or nay on what we suggest. Having said that, I'd rather go all in with realistic growth capacity. I thought about units near transit and commercial. I can see the value in that, but so my car broke down a few months ago, right? And I took it to the shop, right? Okay, no problem, whatever, go get them. I'll wait. I'll take public transportation. I'll take the VTA, because I used to when I used to go to De Anza College, and then I had no car, so I had to go to community college. Take the 22, take the 23. Bam, I'm there. Nobody rides VTA. I was shocked. I went throughout several days of the week, and the ridership, when compared to 4, 6, 10 years ago, is significantly smaller. The folks that I used to see on VTA aren't there anymore. A certain part of the community isn't there anymore. I would see a lot of raza there. I'd see a lot of hardworking people that would work at Hobbies, Denny's, going to school, whatever. I don't see that as much because everyone's doing offline studying, or because those types of jobs or those folks that used to be in those positions aren't here anymore because it's so darn expensive. So I literally got really bummed out, and I thought, units near transit, it's nice to say, but I don't see a lot of folks riding their bikes. I don't see a lot of folks taking the VTA. So symbolically speaking, I get it, but I'm bummed out to say that right now I'm disappointed. I could see more of a value with, and that's not to criticize Paul or anyone on the commission that thinks that way. I'm just sharing my opinions on that, because I think that when you observe all these things and you're on that commission, you have to look at it from a different vantage point, though you have to fight through your biases, right? Because you have your own interests that you think of as important, and this is the way it should be. But you've got to be flexible to all this stuff too. And so when I looked at units near commercial, I could see that more as a value add-on, because yeah, if you do have opportunities around that area or those areas where you can build on density and promote a certain type of housing that could be equitable for those folks that need it the most, and you have a developer that's all in to want to do that, why not? So I hope that gives you some perspective on my thoughts, if that's clear enough.
If I understand correctly, you like number 4 on the left side over number 3 on the left side.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Yin.
I was going to just say that I find it a little bit difficult to answer this question because these are huge chunks of land, and I am always in favor of doing things holistically and well planned and well thought out. These are big proportions of the city that we're looking at, and we're just going to, go through 6 bullet points. I would say in general, like these 6 bullet points all have merit, but each area is very different. Where is the realistic growth? Where's the transit? Where's the commercial? Each one is a little different, and I wouldn't want to just lay it down across all of R3 and say, we're doing it just here, prioritize that. I'm still sticking with each area is its own unique little neighborhood. It's a big chunk of land. I'd rather plan it holistically, and this would be a good start to bring towards the community and say, hey, what do you guys think? I don't want to do it.
Let me add one comment of my own, and then maybe we can, I'm starting to see a couple of themes here, and we can straw poll those, and maybe we'll be done. So for me, what jumped out, as I was trying to think through, the game in my head of where do you put density and whatnot, something I don't see mentioned here, but I think is really important, is actually congestion, right? Let me put it this way. Density has a cost. And if you have a section of town where it's already really congested and people are, it's taking people a long time to just, get 10 blocks to drop their kid off at school. Maybe the school's congested and that their 3rd grader has, 33 kids in that class. That's really important. And I think if you have an area where the traffic's already really bad, I'm not sure that it's fair to say, yeah, let's put it over there, because it drops the additional burden on folks who already have to carry a significant burden. And I think that in a way, there's an equity lens here that's missing if we're not talking about areas that are already heavily impacted and heavily congested, because, we're not always talking about adding another lane to California. Like, we're not gonna do that, right? So my hope is that we could consider congestion both from a transit standpoint, possibly a school district standpoint. There's probably some others that I'm forgetting, but I think that the cost of additional density absolutely should be part of how we think about where it ought to be next. So that's just the only comment I had. Commissioner Yin, did you have anything you wanted to add, or? Okay, Commissioner Cranston?
I don't necessarily disagree, but I guess I'm conditioned by VMT that I can't consider traffic anymore. Vehicle miles traveled is a criterion. If they, if it's all within the city and it's a VMT neutral, then I can't really consider it. So I don't know how. When I stopped looking at traffic impacts as much, simply because the state has said you can't do what we used to do on neighborhoods, on traffic lights and stuff. There's still something, but as you're picking this, I guess it'd be, I don't know how you reconcile that with this requirement for using vehicle miles traveled as a basis for determining whether the traffic has an impact or not.
You absolutely can continue to use LOS or whatever traffic metric you want to use as a basis for a discretionary action, like a rezoning. You absolutely can do that. There is an analytic challenge that we could probably figure out with the help of our consultants. Generally, you study the growth and then you figure out how much traffic it causes, and so you have to do kind of a feedback loop in order to answer that question. But we can do traffic counts to see where there is traffic, and we can orient growth away from those areas. The distinction with CEQA is that we cannot consider traffic as traditionally categorized in our CEQA documents. And you can use CEQA documents to, for example, evaluate projects that are zoning compliant, right? That you maybe have less discretion over. But you can certainly use the location of traffic congestion in an evaluation of a purely discretionary action like a zoning amendment like this.
Vice Chair.
Okay, so having heard what you said, how does that work? So because I thought, like Bill, I thought that there was something that I thought it was explained to me by someone that you couldn't take traffic into consideration. And I get how it relates to CEQA. I totally understand that part. But prior to that part.
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you for the question. I think the best way to explain this is currently how we do review development proposals. So as explained, per state law, under CEQA, we cannot consider a level of service. We must look at vehicle miles traveled in terms of whether there's an environmental impact for which there would be a CEQA mitigation. However, the city also, as we review development projects where there's discretion and so on, we conduct now what's called a multimodal transportation analysis. And there's prescribed scopes of work for that based upon the size of the project in terms of the scale of that. And as part of that analysis, we're bringing in data about what the current traffic conditions are, how this development may add to those traffic conditions, what this development in terms of the bike and ped facility needs in the area, what can this development bring forward in terms of transportation demand management programs to curtail or reduce their vehicle trips. Are there also other, what we're now calling, instead of mitigations, we're saying operational improvements that should be considered that could help then the development go in without bringing the road to a standstill, like adjustments to the traffic signals or other operational changes that could be made. And then we have to do that through conditions of approval as opposed to CEQA mitigation. So providing this in parallel, a similar analysis could be done, because we wouldn't just look at traffic congestion. We would look at, but what are the other opportunities to serve the travel needs in this area? Are we getting a well-developed bike network out of this, a pedestrian network, good connections to transit? An example I want to say is you brought up California Street. The city right now isn't designed for a pilot project to actually do a road diet. We're going to reduce lanes on California. But in exchange for that, we're putting in protected bikeways. We're putting in major pedestrian improvements, and there is transit already on California. So what can we do, in terms of meeting many of our goals, including mobility, to foster alternatives to the car? And, so definitely if we do, if the recommendation is to look, as you're saying, at the cost of congestion in terms of where there may already be congested areas and traffic, the suggestion would be, yes, we look at that, but we also look at our, what other opportunities do we have with our transportation system to help address that, so that it's not the sole determinant in terms of traffic congestion.
Great, thank you for the explanation, because especially for the news about California, because I was also there when I was part of the group that went and suggested, hey, how about we do this in California, blah, 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 which is wonderful. Because I think that was my other concern, which is why I was surprised that we could do this, right? I didn't know that we could, because my concern was, well, wait, if you're going to then try to go to certain R3 areas where they're next to areas that are already dense in population and with vehicle usage, then how do you curtail that? Because it seems like it's like a vicious little cycle that if you're going to have more buildings and more density and more opportunities with different types of housing, naturally you're going to get traffic, more traffic. It's just going to compound on itself, right? So now that you've explained that, then I would like to also include this as a suggestion so that we can also have this as an option for them to study and take into consideration when we do look at zones. Thanks.
And I just wanted to add one sort of expansion of this. When I raised this about congestion, I didn't actually mean just traffic. I'm talking about all kinds of infrastructure. And schools are one of the things that I think of, because again, if you're going to build a bunch of density right next to a really, really impacted elementary school, you're not doing a kindness to those parents of those kids if they're going to end up with 38 kids in a small classroom, right? So anyway, I'll set that one aside because it's almost 10:30 and I think we're real close to being done. So I've heard some themes. I'm going to suggest them. I'd love to see show of hands about which ones we're all good with, and maybe we can get to the finish line. So, if I may, with your forbearance, the one that I've heard Commissioner Cranston is about feasibility. Everybody think that feasibility makes a good addition to the criteria. Looks like we're six and against.
Yeah,
is some iffiness there.
So feasibility is kind of one criterion, right? Saying, like, does this parcel size feasibly create the development? But I think what Commissioner Cranston was saying was, does the area have the preponderance of parcels that can accommodate that density, right?
Well, Commissioner Cranston, if you want to describe it, what he said. Realistic growth capacity. So I think, hold on, Commissioner Nunez, I want to give you a shot.
Commissioner Cranston, did that commentary around the feasibility within like the part, all that stuff about parcels that you mentioned, and when we got into the HOA stuff, was that with the added kind of intent or implication of if and where there is challenges with delivering the desired density based on the kind of like adjacency of parcels that on their own would not support that intended density, but together was your intent that we convey to council that we would like some solution for that to be considered? Or was it more like we just want to consider not developing where these adjacencies make the development not viable?
Answer.
Please.
Question was criteria for selecting locations, and it didn't sound like the intention was that they were going to do everything everywhere, that they'd look at and say, okay, have staff come back and make some recommendations on these may be areas that you want to think about, and that one of the things that staff should consider is, okay, if we include this in that, are there barriers that would make it less realistic to actually achieve the growth that you're trying to do in that area, whether it's small parcel size, a inconsistent type of whether it's HOAs mixed with apartments, that they should consider that when they're bringing that back to council.
Yeah.
Say, this area may be better than this because we're more likely to get it here than over here.
So,
That's what I'm.
So like an informative mapping of constraints within those. Okay, cool. Yeah.
So on the strength of that explanation, do people feel comfortable straw polling that one? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Against or abstain?
I'm just going to go back and say I find it very, very difficult to be making these choices given that we don't know what else is going on, all the other factors. Where are the schools? Where's the traffic? We're having difficulty making the decision. Why are we making the decision if we don't know? So I'm still with, we don't know. I would love to plan this holistically. I think we could get more bike pathways, more pedestrian access ways if we planned it that way. Instead of like little parcels here, we're going to increase the density and put it here just because we can. I know that's one way to do it. I just am not in favor of it. So I'm going to abstain from all of this.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. And then finally, the question of congestion, whether transportation or otherwise, is that an inclusion that folks would feel comfortable supporting? I mean, I know I would.
Can we restate that just in one sentence?
The inclusion of as a criteria, an additional criteria, congestion, existing congestion and the impacts on existing congestion, which could include traffic and educational and other types of infrastructure. So essentially the impact on the people that live there already. So I know I care about it. That's 2.5. Commissioner Cranston, go ahead.
I'm more comfortable with the including doing the multimodal transportation analysis than going out beyond that.
Okay, so keeping it transit.
If you can separate it, I like the multimodal analysis thing.
Okay.
I'm not sure about the others.
Okay. Looking around for nodding heads. So if we said congestion as it pertains to transportation and then the multimodal transportation analysis, yes? Okay, I can be good with that too. That looks like 3. That's just 3, so it's not going to be that. Against or just abstains? So 1 against, 2 against, and then abstentions on that? 2, okay. All right. Anything else that we want to try to straw poll on criteria here for question 4? I don't have any additional speakers. Looking around. Okay. Staff, have you gotten what you need from us?
Are there, I guess I'll just ask, are there any criteria on either side? We heard a couple of commissioners say that, they wanted to deprioritize one or more of these criteria. Didn't hear it consistently, but I just kind of wanted to put that framing out there to see if there was broad consensus around removing any of these criteria from the list.
Commissioner Nunez.
The one I brought up was with regards to criteria for commercial, and my understanding of this is that we're really kind of in large parts thinking through ground floor retail, community serving, commercial services that they not necessarily need to be next to employment areas, whether that be office or some sort of business park necessarily.
So deprioritization of employment areas.
Prioritization of employment areas, yes, in the furtherance of community serving retail.
Okay, and is that for both or just one? Criteria for commercial. Okay, for the second one. Okay. Let's straw poll that. Folks who want to see that deprioritized. I see 1. I see 1. Against? And then abstentions? It's like 6 abstentions on that. Okay. Anyone else like to recommend any other concepts for straw to see if we've got a sense of the commission? Any other additional issues? Staff, anything you think we forgot? Anything you consider to be missing?
No, I think if that's what the commission can has spoken, I think that's that's what we'll bring forward.
Commissioner Yin.
One quick thing. I heard a lot of public comment say that if densities go up, they'd really like to see more parks and open space. I know that, yeah, I'll leave it at that. So maybe that's something that should also be considered.
Are you asking for a straw poll for that? Okay. All right. Staff? You're sure? Okay. I saw you shake your head no, so.
Those types of like incentives or what we'd be looking for would come later in the process. Okay. You could make that recommendation as a group, but that's something that we'll revisit later in the process.
Okay. Commissioner Donahue.
Well, is it additional parks being built as a result of some Quimby Act type? Well, the Quimby Act still applies to these things. Or our parkland dedication ordinance would, yeah, okay. Then one thing that we could potentially do is consider proximity to a kind of existing park infrastructure as similar to proximity to some of these other things, or consider impacts on schools. I don't know if we would, I'm just thinking on the fly here. I don't know if we would want to focus development next to existing parks, which would then put a burden on those parks for the existing users, or if we would want to have it not next to existing parks. So does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Commissioner Cranston.
I guess I'm just not clear what we're talking about here. I mean, are you talking about the criteria for the potential sites to be selected, or just overall concerns about R3 in general? Or I'm not sure how to provide feedback. R3 was identified as part of the housing element. Another part of the housing element is the Parks and Recreation Strategic Plan. And the strategic plan has to take into account the housing element and all of its doing, and including the R3 analysis. So I'm assuming that someone in Parks and Rec is talking to the Parks and Rec Commission and all those folks, and they're looking at what does that mean for the city as a whole. And yeah, I'd love to see it, and we should pass it on to them, that people still talk about it. But I'm personally relying on the Parks and Rec staff and the Parks and Rec Commission to do that analysis, to say what's the parks, and parks were identified as one of those feasibility problems. Okay, so there's this conflict between I want more parks, but it's more expensive to have parks, and I want more parks. And so I'm comfortable letting that Parks and Rec strategic plan answer this question rather than us trying to.
It's up to you if you want me to. Okay.
I was just going to add that I think the way I heard that was it was a potential criteria on one way or the other. I don't think you had an opinion on if it should be a criteria or if it shouldn't necessarily, but should it was, I think, what I was hearing.
That was my intention. Should it be? I'm thinking on the fly about whether I agree that it should be one of the criteria, and I was soliciting other people's thoughts on that to try to help solidify my own thinking.
Let's solicit Dawn's thoughts.
Thank you. I'm not certain it would add value to make that a criteria for selecting where there would be increased density. I think personally, the focus in terms of needing to provide more parkland needs to focus more on, as mentioned by Commissioner Cranston, not only the Parks and Rec strategic plan, but our opportunities to acquire additional open space and develop more open space and parkland options and focusing more on that. So, looking at this different criteria for increased density, but as part of that and good planning, as this increased density goes in, saying, okay, now how are we going to provide them additional park and open space to serve them as well as the existing residents in the area? So this gets back to, as the assistant director was saying, that this could come back later in the process in terms of, how we might be able to, if there's going to be increased densities, use that to incentivize opportunities to get more open space, as well as mentioned before, these projects will be subject to the parkland ordinance as well, and how we use that to strategically locate open space and parks.
Okay, I'll withdraw my suggestion. I was on the Parks and Rec Commission for a while, so I'm the park guy. So I don't know. I had to throw in a parks comment after it was brought up.
Commissioner Yin.
Thank you. Oh, no, I was just going to make this fast. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to confuse things. I was just putting it out there as a potential, and you guys had said you don't really need to take a vote. That could be added in later, but I was just bringing it up as something that the community had actually wanted that's not even on here, which makes just the whole discussion, I guess it was just making my point that if we really wanted to try to get everything we wanted, as much of it as we could, then we would be looking at it more holistically. Because there are so many things on here, I think, that could be added. So I just, heard something from the public comments. It was a big one, put it in there, and already it's kind of difficult. So that's just my point. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Further comments from the commission? Seeing none. Staff, did you get what you needed from us? Wait. Vice Chair Gutierrez, go.
Yeah, okay. And I'll be quick. And I think that's why I had mentioned before that we have to look at this from a higher perspective, right, where we try and limit our biases. Because I think when you have these competing interests and they're so personal to you, whether you're the homeowner or a renter, you've got to look at the bottom line, which is what's in the best interest of the city. How can we best do a model of housing affordability in the city that's going to be compliant with the state and with the needs of what the community has already expressed with the housing element and then what the city council has as priorities. And so you factor all this. You factor in traffic, you factor in schools, you factor in parks, you factor in a different way of thinking about progress. And that's the hardest thing you can do. So, for what it's worth, I want to thank everyone here for pitching in, chiming in, agreeing to disagree, but then still moving forward. So, great job.
Thank you, Vice Chair. All right. Any other comments from the commissioners? Any further requests from staff on this item? All right, so I'm going to declare the study session, item 5, complete. Yay. We'll go to item 6, commission staff announcements, updates, requests, and committee reports. No action will be taken on any questions raised by the commission at this time. Are there any commission staff announcements, updates, requests, or committee reports? Hold on, I'm waiting. Commissioner Donahue.
So I went to the Planning Commissioners Academy last week, and it was fantastic. And yeah, it was great. It was very educational. I mean, I learned a bunch of things. There were a bunch of things that, as the new guy, went kind of over my head. So, maybe if I go back in the future, I'll understand what some of that stuff was. But yeah, it definitely was very helpful, and yeah, so I'd like to thank the city for sending me. It was great.
Thank you for the report out. Commissioner Cranston. That will be answered by Ms. Pancholi.
Thank you, Chair and the Commission. Diana Pancholi, Principal Planner and Staff Liaison to EPC. So our next meeting, this was a special meeting, our next meeting for March 20th is going to be canceled because we don't have anything on the agenda. But please note, Wednesday, April 3rd, the EPC will hold a facilitated retreat at the community center that will focus on team building, improved communication, and roles and responsibilities of the commission, and it will be a public meeting. So the next meeting will be April 3rd. All right. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. My personal thanks to everybody that stuck it out this whole 3 hours and 40 minutes of study session. My particular thanks to staff for staying this long, for commissioners for all this great discussion, great input. And with that, we will adjourn. The meeting is adjourned at 10:42 p.m. Thanks, everybody.